All right, dear colleagues, hello everyone. Hello. My name is Madine Brasheva, and I work as a regional coordinator of the global program for Go4SDGs, Global Opportunities for Sustainable Development Goals in Europe and Central Asia. I want to thank you, first of all, for your interest and your participation in our today's webinar. This activity will last for about 2.5 up to 3 hours, depending on how many discussions we have. And our major focus in this activity will be the issues of sustainable tourism and eco-certification. So this specific activity is a continuation of a series of webinars that we started last year. And today, the way we're going to proceed, our participants should not be just able to listen to some new information about the global initiatives by UNEP and about the assessment that was carried out, but also hopefully they'll participate in the discussion and provide their recommendations and comments, and also help us assess the situation with eco-certification in Central Asia. We're going to start our webinar. So I would like to ask you to unmute yourselves. Please switch on your cameras for us to see who is with us today, if possible. And we're going to open this webinar with the welcoming remarks. I have the honor to give the floor to Mr. Arnold Kreihuber, who is the director of the European Regional Office of UNEP in Europe. Arnold, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madina. Distinguished participants, dear colleagues and partners, it is a great pleasure for me to be here today with you all and open this regional webinar on sustainable tourism for the Eastern European and Central Asian countries, and to highlight the importance of pursuing the root causes of the triple planetary crisis in this context. Of course, you are familiar by now with the triple planetary crisis of climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss. And we will, of course, through this webinar, look at this triple planetary crisis, particularly through the lens of advancing tourism towards more sustainability. The United Nations Environment Programme, UNEP, tries to strengthen efforts globally around SDG 12, responsible consumption and production. And UNEP supports in this context, particularly governments and stakeholders in adopting circular practices, including in tourism. Recognized as a vital economic sector, tourism contributes around 10% to global GDP and provides 1 in every 10 jobs worldwide. While beneficial for economic growth, especially in the least developing countries and small island states, it can also negatively impact the environment and local cultures if not managed sustainably. The tourism sector accounts for roughly 8% of global greenhouse gas emissions, which is quite large in the overall context and possible sources of emissions. Reiterating the above, tourism in some countries of Central Asia and Caucasus is one of the most dynamically developing sectors with great input to GDPs. It is also recognized as a labor-intensive sector, which also plays an important role in women's economic empowerment. So it's of great importance that we look at this important sector and try collectively to make it more sustainable. And we strongly believe that in consultation with constituents, governments should gear the transformation of tourism towards an integrated and harmonious system. Thus, national development strategies should be based on such multi-constitutional planning over a longer time span. Following this notion, in 2022, UNEP's Go4SDGs program initiated sustainable tourism activities in the Kyrgyz Republic, showing promising results for replication in other Caucasus and other Central Asian countries. Efforts focused on reducing plastic pollution and food waste in recreation areas, encouraging women's participation, developing policy amendments, and proposing a roadmap for plastic waste management in tourism is critical. Additionally, we try to support the private sector's commitment to sustainability, particularly in tourism, by pioneering new business models for sustainable tourism and promoting green sites. These are just a few examples, and I have no doubt during this webinars we will dive deeper into some of those. But with this in mind, we also need to do our utmost to help local communities through project activities to establish green jobs in the tourism industry and introduce respective unified certification standards in tourism in line with the UNEP, UNWTO Global Tourism Plastics Initiative and the Glasgow Declaration on Climate Change in Tourism. Dear all, greening the tourism industry requires expert and technical investments at various levels. And so we're proud to partner with organizations like the UN World Tourism Organizations, the Global Eco-Label Network, Booking.com, Airbnb, various others, and also local governments and all the private sector partners, of course. These collaborations aim to develop a regional approach to sustainable tourism tailored to national specificities and needs. And today's webinar will hopefully be an opportunity for inspiration, discussion, and the sharing of ideas for innovative solutions for sustainable developments in countries in the region. So with these few remarks, let me welcome you all again to this regional webinar. And Madina, I'll hand it back over to you. Thank you very much.
Madina, you're still muted. Apologies. We are not. Apologies. I think I'm a little stressed out. Anyway, thank you, Arnold, for your welcoming remarks. Thank you. And you basically revealed the global trends once again, and that will have an impact, is already having an impact on our region, Eastern Europe and Central Asia. I want to thank you for covering these major issues and thank you for your support in the activities that we're conducting in the region. So now the floor is given to Ms. Adriana Zacharias, who is head of the global coordinator of Go4SDGs and also a deputy chairperson of the Secretariat of 10 YFP of our organization. So we heard a couple of times from her previously. She participated in our previous activities. And we want to thank you for your support and your commitment. Thank you for being with us at all times. And thank you for playing an active role in participation, both designing our activities and also in conducting discussions. And the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madina. Dear experts, colleagues, and friends, let me join Arnold also in welcome you all to this webinar. I think Arnold has expressed and explained clearly why sustainable tourism is important in our work. I will be short. I want first to thank and say that from Go4SDGs, we are very happy to be partnering and working together with the Ministries of Environment and Tourism in Central Asia and the Caucasus. And happy to see you all here in our second webinar. And to continue this work, I especially want to thank the UN World Tourism Organization, the One Planet Network, our regional partner, ESG Central Asia, Booking.com, the Global Sustainable Tourism Council, and many others that are supporting us in this work and see how we can increase the sustainability in the tourism sector in this region. As Arnold said, in UNEP, we are very keen in and working a lot in addressing this triple planetary crisis. We have seen that one of the root causes of this triple planetary crisis is our unsustainable patterns of consumption and production and the linear model, the linear economy that we have, and we need to really move towards circular economy. And this is really the objective of Go4SDGs. We are an accelerator of SDGs, in particular SDG 12 and 8. We focus in key sectors, high impact sectors, how we call, and tourism is one of them. Arnold already have provided the importance of tourism, but I want to highlight how tourism, besides being a very important economic driver, is also what we call has a multiplier effect. Tourism is linked to transport, to accommodation, to building and construction, to agriculture, to waste. And that's how it can have negative or positive impacts. If we inject sustainability in the tourism, then the multiplier effect in the other sectors will be then turned into positive impacts or to reduce the negative impact. So that's why we are very important in focusing on this. Also, we know that in the last decade in the Central Asia, tourism has become also an important sector and a driver of economic growth. We are very happy to see that the tourism is increasing in the region. According to the Ministry of Tourism and Sport of Kazakhstan, we know that last year, tourism foreign tourists increased to 1 million in Kazakhstan, and in Uzbekistan it is 3.6 million. So that's great. We also mentioned that tourism is a key driver for job generation. And just to give an example, in Kyrgyz Republic today, for one job that is creating in the tourism sector, 5 others are created in the multiplier sector. So that's why this is so important. But as we mentioned, the negative impacts are still there. Waste management, plastic waste generation, the plastic pollution, the impact in the climate, nature, etc. So no need to say why we are here, but 2 things I want to announce. First, in the last seminar that we have, one of the key conclusions that you gave us is that it was very important to have an assessment of the environmental certification in tourism and to have a unified standards for the region. So good news, today you will hear the results of this assessment. The second is the partnership that we have with the One Planet Network, the Sustainable Tourism Program. And with that, I really want to thank my colleague Svetlana Mikhaileva that has been supporting us a lot and has been bringing a lot of experts in the partnership in this program that we have. So thanks so much, Svetlana, to be here with us and in the whole road that we are already work together. So 2 important things. We are about to close the COP28. We have heard not very encouraging news. There's no more time to waste. And in this, the tourism has an important declaration, initiatives, the Glasgow Declaration for Action in the Tourism Sector. So we will be presenting this, and this is an invitation for you to join that. The second key thing is 2 weeks ago, we have the 3rd international negotiation for the INC, the International Negotiation Committee for the legally binding plastic agreement. So we want to end the plastic pollution, the INC, as you might know. Tourism has been highlighted a key sector. And the good news, they are very active. They want to be engaged. They want to contribute. And in this, again, the One Planet Network has a very good initiative. It's a Global Tourism Plastic Initiative. We want to welcome you or invite you all to please join this initiative. You will also hear more about it. And again, your participation in this will be important so that we become active actors in really addressing the triple planetary crisis, supporting to meet the Sustainable Development Goals, the Paris Agreements, and end plastic pollution. So with this, I want to welcome you all again, and I give the floor back to Madina. Thank you.
Thank you, Adriana, for your welcome remarks. You basically disclosed a little bit our upcoming presentations. Thank you so much. You tapped into the topics of our discussions. But before we switch directly to the presentations and discussions, there are a few important things that I want to mention. In the chat here, as you can see, here it says it's important to select the right channel. If you're a Russian speaker, please select the Russian channel. If you're an English speaker, please select the English channel for us to have a smooth, seamless discussion. If you have any questions, let me ask you to raise your hands, to introduce yourself, tell us where you're from. Also, you can write the same question in the chat that we're going to read, and this will be addressed to our speakers. The last but not the least, I want to introduce our partner in the region, ESG Central Asia, and the chairperson of this organization, Ms. Asel Ersenbekova. And so we work with her jointly. We conduct the same activity, this activity today, and she'll be our second moderator, my co-moderator. So now let us look at the agenda. Now, like I said earlier, the first session on global initiatives in the tourism sector. And here I'm very happy to invite our partner, longstanding partner from the 10 YFP program, Svetlana Mikhailova, who is the coordinator of the program on sustainable tourism, One Planet. And the questions that the issues we're going to discuss, this information about the global initiative on plastics and tourism. This is information on Glasgow Declaration on climate action in tourism, and also the global roadmap on reducing food waste in the tourism sector. Like I said earlier, all presentations can be found in the virtual folder. So I'd like to kindly ask you to, here's the link. There is a link in the chat so that all participants could gain access to these presentations. So Svetlana, you have the floor.
Hello all, thank you so very much, Medina. Thank you so much, colleagues. Ladies and gentlemen, very honored and pleased to be with you today, even though remotely. First of all, I would like to express my deep gratitude to Go4SDG's team for organization of this important event. May I suggest, colleagues, that you share the presentation, or am I expected to share it myself?
Share the presentation for you in Russian language.
Thank you so very much. So you can go to the next slide. Thank you. So today, as mentioned already by my colleagues, I was invited to present you the work of the One Planet Sustainable Tourism Program. There will be a lot of information, so get ready. It will be pretty dense, but I hope very clear. So this One Planet Sustainable Tourism Program, it's a global network of governments, businesses, academia, NGOs, and business associations. And our objective is to support implementation of sustainable and circular consumption and production in the tourism industry globally. Our program offers vision as well as concrete pathways and tools that are adapted to the reality and specificity of the tourism sector. For example, what are the measures that a Ministry of Tourism can take to support fight against climate change? What are the actions that one can take, for instance, as a manager of online booking platform to help tackling the issue of plastic pollution? So our program is working on providing guidance and tools to answer these type of questions. And we have currently 3 work streams, as just mentioned by Medina, on plastics, on climate, and on food systems with focus on food waste. Next slide, please. Thank you. So let's start with the Global Tourism Plastics Initiative. It will be the biggest part of my presentation, and then I will run you a bit more faster through our work on climate and on food systems. So the objective of the Global Tourism Plastics Initiative, or GTPI, as we call it in a shorter manner, is to end plastic pollution generated by tourism activities and promote circular economy responses. And this Global Tourism Plastics Initiative acts as tourism sector interface of the new Plastics Economy Global Commitment led by Ellen MacArthur Foundation. Many of you may know it already. And this initiative, Global Tourism Plastics Initiative, is led by UNEP and the World Tourism Organization with technical support from Ellen MacArthur Foundation. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the Global Tourism Plastics Initiative requests businesses, destinations, supporting organizations to develop commitments around following principles that you can see listed on the screen in the hierarchical order, which is very important, starting from the most impactful. So first, we request to take ambitious action on elimination of problematic and unnecessary plastic packaging and items. Second, we request commitments around introduction of reuse models, rather than replacing single-use plastics with other single-use alternatives. We are really advocating and supporting our signatories with introduction of reusable solutions, which are environmentally are much more viable. Then, in case some plastic items and packaging can't be avoided, we encourage tourism stakeholders to collaborate with suppliers to obtain packaging with increased recycled content. And we also recommend to work with municipalities and waste management infrastructures to improve recycling and composting rates of plastics. And of course, the annual reporting on progress is essential to track results. So it's also a requirement for this initiative. And more specifically, signatories with heavy use of plastics, for instance, accommodation providers, cruise lines, suppliers of tourism amenities, have also to measure the weight of plastics in their operations annually, which allow us to track progress in terms of plastic consumption from one year to another. So we are really moving from a model of a pledging mechanism where stakeholders are just saying what they will be doing to a really a mechanism that guarantees transparency through a measurement and monitoring framework that we are offering to our signatories. So the initiative was launched back in 2020, so it's already 3 years old, and it has been growing steadily for the past 3 years with great enthusiasm and active participation from tourism industry stakeholders, including largest hotel chains as well as small and medium enterprises. We now reached over 200 signatories on headquarter level, and 70% of them being businesses. When I'm mentioning a headquarter level, it means that, for instance, a business like Accor or Club Med or TUI that have thousands and thousands of properties all over the world, they sign in as one entity, which allow us to make sure that then when like a very large company like TUI or Accor, they are signing, they committing on implementation of this vision that you can see on the screen all over their businesses globally. So also this continuous growth of the initiative, it demonstrates a true readiness, I would say, of the tourism sector to effectively support the global efforts towards hopefully an ambitious international treaty to end plastic pollution that is currently being negotiated, to which my colleague Adriana just referred to in her opening remarks. Next slide, please. So very briefly, which stakeholders can join the Global Tourism Plastics Initiative? All tourism stakeholders have a role to play in reduction of plastic pollution. Tour operators, travel agents and platforms, destinations, accommodation providers, suppliers, cruise lines, all can become signatories. And in our initiative, we have a series of tailored commitments that really adapted to specificities of operation or each of these stakeholders. So we will not be asking the same thing from a supplier of tourism amenities or from a cruise liner. Next, please. So the Global Tourism Plastics Initiative, it becoming a bit more technical. We are working on the concept of problematic and unnecessary plastic items and packaging. So how do we identify problematic and unnecessary plastics? These are plastics that fall into one or more criteria that you can see on the screen. So, for instance, those are plastics that are not reusable, not recyclable, nor compostable. They contain hazardous chemicals. They may disrupt circularity or compostability of other elements. They have a high likelihood of being littered or ending up in natural environment. And very importantly, those can be avoided or can be replaced, so meaning they are unnecessary. This definition allows us a certain flexibility in terms of a plastic that you would, for instance, prioritize for elimination from your operation if you're a tourism business, or that you would prioritize or not in tourism-specific legislation or certification schemes. For instance, in some countries, single-use plastics items, they are required by legislation, for instance, for health purposes. In this case, we, of course, will not request those to be eliminated as long as there are legal requirements for the use of this in a specific country or in a specific region. Next slide, please. So what plastic items do we recommend to prioritize in terms of elimination and in terms of measurement as well? Very important. Last year, we developed in consultative manner with businesses that are part of the Global Tourism Plastics Initiative the methodology to measure weight of plastics in tourism operations that have this guidance. Next slide, please. So for this exercise, we undertook assessment of consumption of plastic packaging and items in operations of our signatories, as well as in operations of the members of Sustainable Hospitality Alliance. And the assessment, after the assessment, we classified plastics in 3 categories. First category being a priority one, you can see it on the screen. So these 3 categories, they were developed according to following criteria that you can see on the left of your screens. So first, industry prevalence or awareness. So basically, what are the most used items? Industry action, what are the items that are most addressed in terms of elimination, or at least were addressed at the time 1.5 years ago when we were undertaking the assessment. Then, property level of control, meaning, are these items directly purchased, or are they part of a product that is purchased, for instance, in form of a wrapping? Risk of littering, very important factor. We also took into consideration in our prioritization the items that represent the biggest risk of littering. And of course, typical usage intensity, and usage intensity, it's a metric which represents number of pieces of plastic items or packaging used per guest per night, and it is calculated using data provided by hotel operations and properties. So in category 1 that you can see on the screen, you can see a lot of bathroom amenities, straws, takeaway containers and cups. Next slide, please. So here is category 2. We have here plastic bottles and cling film. So this very thin, wrapping film that you use in kitchens, which is, by the way, according to latest GTPI reporting results, is still very, very much present in operations of tourism businesses and considered as a key item for elimination as well. Next slide, please. And in the category 3, we have all other items, 74 more specifically, so I'm not going to read all of those in the list, but basically we recommend to address those items in category 3 once actions related to category 1 and 2 were put in place, and those were addressed in priority. Next slide, please. So where do our signatories stand with progress of implementation of the Global Tourism Plastics Initiative commitments, particularly around elimination of unnecessary and problematic plastics? Last year, the measurement methodology that I just mentioned, it was piloted for the first time during the Global Tourism Plastics Initiative reporting cycle. And on the screen, you can see the QR code to our latest reporting results, and the new round of reporting is in progress, and we will be the results will be available around March, April 2024, so next year. Next slide, please. So the 2022 reporting exercise revealed the following trends among accommodation providers. Rooms, food and drink services, and bathrooms, they are the most common area for progress on elimination of plastics and introduction of reuse models. So the most progress was undertaken so far in rooms, food and drink services, and bathrooms. And among most common actions, we have seen, for instance, replacing single-use amenities with large refillable containers, making plastic items available only upon request of guests, and providing alternatives to single-use plastic bottles. So for example, Six Senses, it's a luxury hotel chain that many of you may know. They are among our signatories, and they introduced stainless steel containers in their kitchens to eliminate single-use cling film, which was identified by several GTPI signatories as particularly difficult to replace with sustainable reusable alternatives. Next, please. So to continue progressing and implementing GTPI commitments, many signatories are beginning to work closely with suppliers to move towards reusable, recyclable, and compostable packaging, or to increase recycled content of plastic packaging and items in case plastic items are still purchased. And as an example, TUI Group that I mentioned earlier has incorporated circular economy principles in their procurement policies, which among others require, for instance, to reduce as much as possible single-use plastics and packaging and promote reuse, and it starts showing already their results. Next, please. So talking about reuse, which is our second priority in the initiative, right? Reuse is a key aspect and requirement of the Global Tourism Plastics Initiative. So let's take a closer look. 2 years ago, our program issued a very short guidance that you can see on the screen. It's really like, I think it's a 15-pager. It summarizes from the perspective of the tourism sector the key findings of UNEP Life Cycle Initiative team. My colleague, I believe, from this team will be intervening later today. Their findings around alternatives to various single-use plastic packaging and items. And this specific guidance offers recommendations with regards to replacement of single-use plastic bottles, caps, bags, takeaway food packaging, and tableware. Next slide, please. So let's very just rapidly use an example of plastic bottles. So the main recommendation here is to avoid replacing single-use plastic bottles with other single-use solutions. So switching to other single-use options likely would lead to burden shifting. So certain single-use bottle types might outperform single-use plastic bottles in some environmental categories, such as marine ecotoxicity, but they would have worse impacts in other indicators such as climate change and CO2 emissions. So to guarantee that reusable bottles show better environmental performance, they must be effectively reused multiple times. The idea seems a bit obvious, but it's actually very important, because whatever the material is, the environmental impact of this material will decrease with the number of uses. So if a reusable solution is not effectively used multiple times, it's obvious that it, like from life cycle perspective, it will not have good environmental impacts neither. So effective reuse multiple times is absolutely key. And lastly, non-container options such as water dispensers, they show considerable advantages in all environmental categories compared to bottled water, no matter the material of this bottled water. Next slide, please. And our team is, by the way, currently implementing a series of trainings to support our signatories with introduction of reusable solutions like the one I just mentioned to plastic items that are particularly difficult to eliminate. And we are also piloting in a bilateral partnership with 8 of our signatories these solutions, and we will be able to measure results of this implementation in 2 to 3 months. Which is for me a very exciting project. So to close my introduction of our work on plastics, I would like to encourage you really to take a look at our database of tools and resources that were developed always in collaboration in a consultative manner with our signatories to make sure that actually the knowledge, the tools, the methodologies that we are producing, they are aligned with the needs of our network and of the industry. And I focused my presentation today really on, let's say, a bit of illustration of technical support that we provide to businesses implementing circular economy of plastics, but we also work with governments. And we are currently developing, for instance, recommendations on integration of circular economy of plastics in tourism policies. And so the recommendations, they target ministries of tourism. And the objective would be to issue these recommendations by the end of next year, to align with the timelines and with the outcomes of the future treaty. Next, please. And now I will walk you rapidly through our 2 other work streams on climate change and food systems. No worries, my presentation on these 2 topics will be shorter. I really focused a bit more on the plastics initiative today, just to showcase you a bit more what type of technical support we are providing. And we are providing similar technical support in our 2 other work streams, but I will not be able to go as deep as on plastics on the topic of climate change and food. But if you're interested, I'm always available and would be happy to bilaterally provide more information if needed. So let's start with the Glasgow Declaration on Climate Action in Tourism. I don't think I will surprise anyone here by saying that climate change is one of the biggest challenges humanity is currently facing, and for a very long time, tourism sector was underrepresented in climate negotiations, and tourism businesses, they were lacking clear guidance on where they should start and what should be done to produce real impacts. The challenge is really too massive, and no organization can really address it alone. And we believe that the sector needed a collective action. And this is how the idea of this Glasgow Declaration was born, and it was launched 2 years ago at Climate COP26 in Glasgow under the leadership of our colleagues from the World Tourism Organization, so UNWTO. Unfortunately, our colleagues were not available to join the webinar today simply because they are just traveling right now from COP28. But all of the work that I'm presenting to you today is done very closely, like in very close partnership with the World Tourism Organization. Next slide, please. Let's just pass the video. Let's just go to the next slide, please. Thank you very much. So by joining the Glasgow Declaration on Climate Action in Tourism, signatories commit to support the global goals to halve emissions by 2030 and reach net zero by 2050 at the latest. So basically supporting the implementation of the Paris Agreement, of course. Deliver climate action plans within 12 months after they signed the initiative. Make sure they are aligned with this climate action plans with the 5 pathways that you have on the screen. So measure, decarbonize, regenerate, collaborate, and finance. And same as with our plastic initiative, report publicly on annual basis on the progress of implementation of this action plans. Next slide, please. So the Glasgow Declaration recommends 5 pathways that needs to be addressed by our signatories, and you can see them on the screen. So I will walk you rapidly through the definition of those. First, measure. Tourism-related emissions need to be measured and they need to be disclosed. Decarbonize. Ambitious actions around decarbonization need to be taken, which means that emission reduction targets needs to be addressed in priority. And this offsets, very important, this offsets playing only a subsidiary role. Regenerate. Tourism industry presents a huge potential in terms of both adaptation and mitigation. And through Regenerate pillar, we recommend actions directed to restoration and to protection of ecosystems. And then, of course, as I mentioned, the initiative offers a platform and opportunity to collectively develop solutions, so collaborate. And it goes without saying that financial and human resources need to be allocated properly to respond to these needs, so finance. Next slide, please. So 2 years after the launch of the initiative, we are very proud and happy to announce that we have over 850 organizations that signed this commitment. The full list of signatories can be consulted on our One Planet website, but here you can see on the screen the split per type of the organization, which shows that tour operators and accommodation providers are the largest part of our signatories. Next slide, please. So last week at COP28, our colleagues from UNWTO revealed results of the very first reporting cycle of the Glasgow Declaration on Climate Action in Tourism. Progress updates and climate action plans were collected between January and August this year, and we received 388 progress updates from our signatories. And among those, 249 climate action plans were submitted. So this abbreviation that you can see on the screen, CAP, it's climate action plans, actually. And among those, 30 climate action plans were submitted by tourism destinations. So those are very encouraging results, showing that industry starts taking concrete actions that go beyond pledging. So we are moving in the right direction. Next slide, please. So in terms of capacity building and knowledge production, last year, the team has prioritized work around measurement, and colleagues from the World Tourism Organization led development of overview of methodologies and tools to measure GHG emissions. As I just mentioned, measure is our first pillar. Unfortunately, I don't have enough time to walk you through those methodologies, but really encourage you to using this QR code on the screen, or just consulting our database on the One Planet website, so that you can see, can have access to the overview of existing measurement tools for the tourism sector, which is quite practical guidance, right? Next slide, please. So same for our work around plastics. We have curated a database of tools and resources that I would really like to encourage you to consult. Among tools we have been developing lately, for instance, recommendations to tourism policymakers around development of climate action plans and policies. And this work is led by UNWTO and UNEP with support from UNFCCC. Which makes sure that we are fully aligned with the knowledge around Paris Agreement, around NDCs. And this policy guidance, it provides recommendations to ministries of tourism and national tourism administrations on how climate action can be integrated in tourism policies, and how climate nationally determined contributions, or NDCs, can comprise solutions related to tourism industry, and why is it important. And this guidance is currently undergoing a public consultation, and it will be officially released in the very beginning of 2024. Next, please. Next slide, please. And lastly, it's my last slide on climate topic. Our program is also aims at providing a platform for tourism businesses and destinations to share best practices. Still a previous slide, please. If you could move to the previous slide, please. Thank you so much. Very rapidly. Thank you very much. So the QR code on your screen, you can consult also a series of short webinars where our signatories talk about their journey of implementation of climate solutions. So it's really kind of a conversation, short conversation, 30-minute long, with a different signatory of Glasgow Declaration telling about how they started measuring or how they started implementing various solutions around mitigation or restoration of ecosystems, so on. Next slide now, thank you. And the third topic I would like to briefly, really briefly introduce you today is our work stream on sustainable food systems. As you certainly know, the current food systems have huge environmental impacts, and sustainable agri-food production is the single biggest threat to nature today, with various drivers leading to 70% of biodiversity loss, including deforestation and overfishing. Also, global food industry has very high impacts in terms of GHG emissions and represents over 30% of global GHG emissions, and additionally, according to various global estimations, around 1/3 of food is wasted, which is absolutely horrendous figure. Next slide, please. So the importance of environmental and social impacts of food waste is why Sustainable Development Goal Target 12.3 was developed. You can see it on the screen, and the objective of this target is to halve food waste globally by 2030. This target, however, doesn't include tourism, that, according to our estimation, would be wasting around 11 billion meals annually, which is huge. So to support tourism sector actions on effectively reducing the food waste and achieving this SDG target, our program developed the global roadmap for food waste reduction in the tourism sector that you can see on the screen. And the roadmap offers a framework for tourism stakeholders to embrace sustainable management of food so that it never becomes waste. Next, please. The roadmap articulates around 3 pillars, most impactful solution being first, so it's kind of similar to our logic in the plastics initiative. We recommend vision and prioritization of solutions in a clear order. So first, prevention of food waste and surplus, meaning the priority is to put in place solutions to prevent food from becoming waste. If surplus occurs, it's allowed by, and if it's allowed by legislation in place, of course, it should be redistributed to people. And lastly, if 2 first solutions are insufficient, it's important to divert food waste from landfills through various revalorization processes. Next, please. So, how do we achieve this? First, it's important to always set clear targets. It's not just about ideals, it's about quantifiable goals. So for accommodation providers, this could be reducing for food waste per guest per night. For cruise lines, it might be enhancing onboard processing techniques. Second, measuring our progress. What gets measured gets managed. And by keeping a close eye on our impact, we can ensure that we are making effective progress. 3, taking collective action. Alone, our efforts may seem like a drop in the ocean, but together we can create change and really reshape the way our industry perceives food. And lastly, reporting and sharing. Our journey will certainly have ups and downs, but being transparent and sharing our wins and learning from our challenges, we are really fostering the collective progress. Next slide, please. So on the screen, you can see examples of targets that a roadmap is asked to set accommodation providers and cruise lines. But I would like still to mention that roadmap isn't just for giants in the industry. It calls every industry player, big or small, to do their part, from small bed and breakfast to a fancy restaurant in the tourism hotspots, from travel agencies to tour guides. We all have a role to play, and the roadmap is supporting the movement. Next, please. So I'm afraid I don't have more time to walk you through the tools that we are offering in this work stream, but same as with plastics and climate, we have a dedicated platform with resources. And as an example here on the screen, we have produced a series of fact sheets on procurement, so on purchasing practices, guiding tourism on food purchasing practices and their impacts in terms of CO2 emissions, water consumption. We offer information on fair trade practices, for instance, or on plant-based diets, on local products, so on. So very, very interesting and rich materials here. And next, and my last slide. We are also offering communication tools to better communicate on the importance of the sustainable management of food and how the tourism sector can help accelerate in such practices. And you will you can access it also on our website. So I will stop now. I do understand that I provided really a lot of information, and apologies if I was a bit too talkative. And now would be really happy to answer your questions. Over to you, Medina. Thank you so much.
Благодарю, Светлана. Исключительно интересная презентация. Я не в первый раз слушаю ваше выступление. С каждым разом открываю себе очень много
the first time that I hear
нового,
a presentation, and
интересного,
every time I
новые
hear something
инструменты,
new, something
подходы.
interesting here
Я
about new
знаю, что
tools and
активно
approaches, and I
разрабатываются,
know
проводятся
that
исследования.
there's
У
a lot
меня
of
была также
research,
возможность
so I
побывать на
also
вашем
had a
тренинге
chance
для
to visit your
гостевых
training, to
домов и
attend your training
туроператоров
for
в
guest
Полночном
houses and
Востоке.
tourism
Спасибо вам
operators. I
огромное.
was
Я
really,
надеюсь,
really
что
impressed. Thank
такая
you
же
so much.
возможность
And
будет
I
и для
hope
нашего
that
региона,
we'll
для
have
нашего
the same
бизнеса,
opportunities for our region and for
получить
our
из первых
businesses
рук от
to
ваших ведущих
receive
экспертов
firsthand from your
информацию,
leading
как
experts
управлять пластиком в
information
туристическом
about how
секторе,
to manage
какие
plastic in
меры
the tourism
мы
sector,
можем предпринять
and
в
also on what
туристическом
measures
секторе
can
для
be adopted
адаптации
in
к
the
изменению
tourism sector
климата.
to adapt
И,
to climate
соответственно,
change.
это СУР
And therefore,
12.3
this is
по
SDG
пищевым отходам, да? То
12.3
есть что
on food waste.
необходимо
So
учесть?
what
Ну,
exactly
для
needs to
наших
be considered?
участников, кто
For
вас
our
видит в первый раз,
participants,
я думаю,
those
наверное,
who saw you for the first
появится
time,
еще
I
больше
believe that
вопросов.
they will have even
Поэтому
more
я
questions.
предлагаю вам
So
сейчас не
therefore, I
отключаться. Мы сейчас
suggest that
заслушаем
you stay
следующую
with us.
презентацию. Я
We'll
думаю,
have
что
our next
она будет
presentation.
логическим
I hope that
продолжением
this will be a logical
тому, что вы
continuation of
презентовали.
what
И
you
потом
just
у нас
presented.
будет сессия
And then
вопрос-ответ.
after this, we'll
Спасибо
have a
вам
Q&A
большое.
session.
Пожалуйста, не
Thank you so
отключайтесь.
much, Svetlana.
А
Please stay
сейчас я
with us.
хочу пригласить с
Now I want to
выступлением госпожу
invite
Клаудию Джакавелли,
Ms. Claudia
программного
Giacovelli,
сотрудника
who
UNEP.
is a program officer of UNEP,
Значит, тема выступления
and
«Компас
she'll
к
be
нулевому
speaking on
загрязнению
the
пластиком.
compass of
Путь к
zero
новой экономике
plastic
пластмасс». У
pollution.
нас, когда мы создавали
And
программу
so when we
сегодняшнего вебинара
developed
с
our
нашими
agenda,
коллегами
designed
с
our
ESG
agenda for this
Центральная
webinar
Азия,
with our
мы
colleagues,
говорили о том, что,
so we were
во-первых, мы
saying
очень
that,
рады, что в регионе
first of all,
Центральной
we're so
Азии
happy
есть
that in
понимание
Central Asia, we
того,
already
что
have this
необходимо
understanding
заниматься вопросами
of
управления
first of all, we need to be
одноразовым
working
пластиком,
on issues
рассматривать
of
перспективы,
managing
да,
single-use plastic and also
роль, то есть
discussing
это
the prospects
ответственность бизнеса,
and this is the
значит,
responsibility
обязанности
of
правительства и
businesses
так далее.
and
Так вот,
the
уважаемые
obligation
коллеги,
of the state.
UNEP
So, dear
разработал
colleagues, UNEP
стратегический
has also
документ,
developed
который
a
я сейчас
strategic
озвучила,
document that I just
который
mentioned,
показывает, какие
and
могут
this
быть,
document
должны быть предприняты шаги,
demonstrates what steps
значит,
need to be taken,
реформы, которые
what
помогут
reforms
вам
may be
перейти,
carried out that will help
конечно,
you
полностью отказаться от
transition.
пластика
Of
мы не
course, it's
сможем на
impossible
данном
to
этапе,
fully
но,
move
по
away from
крайней
plastic
мере,
at this stage, but at
спокойно,
least this
без
will help us
большого ущерба для
without a
бизнеса
lot of
перейти
damage to
от
our
отказа
business.
от
This will help
то есть
us
эффективного управления
eliminate some
пластмассой.
plastic, and then this will
Пожалуйста,
help us manage
Клаудия, вам
plastic.
слово.
So,
Ждем
Claudia, you
вашей
have the
презентации.
floor, and we'll be happy to listen to you.
Thank you very much, Madina, and good day, everyone. It's great pleasure to be here with you. I just want to confirm that you can hear me fine. Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much. And I do hope that it was very pleasant to listen through the presentation made by Svetlana. And the messages resonate and are very much aligned with what we found to be the overarching global guidance and lessons that we've been learning from studying from a life cycle perspective. When we compare basically single-use plastic products versus single-use or reusable alternatives, that's pretty much what we have been finding. And it's great to know that the Global Tourism Initiative has been building and capitalizing on that knowledge to really create their messaging. If we go to the next slide. So I'm Claudia Giacovelli, project manager from UNEP and part also of the Life Cycle Initiative. Just quickly on the initiative itself, this is a multi-stakeholder partnership, public and private, that brings together global knowledge from life cycle assessment and perspective, and tries to put together recommendations and knowledge product to really strengthen the capacity of policymakers to advance on science-based decisions. As we know today, so going to the next slide, one of the big issues why we are gathered here today is really to try and understand how to best tackle the plastic pollution matter, and particularly in relation to single-use plastic products. We know that this is a massive issue. 80% of the marine litter comes from human activities. So even if we found the litter in the sea and in our waterways, in the ocean, we know that most of it really comes from land-based sources. So we need to try and look at tackling the source of the pollution matter. Adriana alluded to it in her opening remarks on the fact that there is an intergovernmental negotiating committee currently ongoing, where 193 member states are working together to develop a legally binding agreement to end plastic pollution by 2040. This was mandated by a resolution of the UN Environment Assembly, Resolution 514, that gave basically the mandate requesting government, and government decided basically resolved to come together to end plastic pollution and do that through a legally binding instrument. So what have we learned? If we go to the next slide, What is the biggest learning that we have so far? And I want to start that by quoting Ms. Inger Andersen, Executive Director of UNEP. In the opening remarks of the third negotiating committee that just took place in Nairobi a month ago, she started her opening speech of the plenary session saying that ending plastic pollution will take nothing less than a complete redesign of how we produce, use, recover, and dispose of plastics. That's a massive undertaking. So the question is, where do we start? So we should really start by reducing the size of the problem. So we are advocating basically for a system change. What we need is really to put in place a complete redesign of the system. And the entry point to that is the starting by reducing the size of the problem. How do we do that? By focusing on eliminating the production of unnecessary and problematic polymers and plastic products. So the first step is really to try and reduce the size of the problem. We want to see a shift in renewable energy sources, so increase in renewable energy sources and recycled feedstock in the production. We need to eliminate the use of hazardous chemical in the production of our product and increase the recycled content in the product itself. So not just in the feedstock, but also in the product itself. And products don't necessarily need to be packaged and overpackaged, etc. So we are challenging somehow how design is made, how our products are designed. And as we heard just earlier today, definitely from a life cycle perspective, we have seen that we need to increase reuse and refill system, because reusing products and keeping products in the economy for as long as possible does reduce the environmental impact of the products. So increasing reuse is key to this shift. And of course, we cannot forget to improve our waste management system, so collection, sorting, and recycling infrastructure. But that, please be careful, it's only a part of the solution. So the system change is really crucial, and we can go to the next slide, please. What another learning that we had from our life cycle studies is that all materials have an impact. There is no one product that has no impact. So all materials have an impact, and the most sustainable product is the one that is reusable and that already exists. So what is important in the way we design the system change is that we need to bring all stakeholders in the economy with us, governments within the leads, but we need to engage with industry, we need to engage with the research organization, with the community, to make sure that the system, that the change that we are implementing actually gets traction and is implemented. And the change needs to happen all along the life cycle of plastics. And I've been throwing around these words, life cycle, a few times already. We've heard it this morning, but what does it mean? A life cycle approach to plastic pollution. If we move to the next slide, you will see a graph that shows basically what is a life cycle approach to plastic pollution. It really starts, a life cycle approach, it really is an approach that starts from the natural resource extraction, so from the extraction and production of raw materials, goes into the design and production, continues into packaging and distribution. It looks at what are the input and output whenever we use a product, and goes all the way to disposal. As we are trying to close the loop in a circular economy context, we are also considering as part of the life cycle of the product, of course, all the activities that concern recycling of materials and the reuse of these materials and products. Using a life cycle approach to plastic and plastic product and plastic pollution really helps us identify what are the hotspots, so what are the biggest driver of impact, and trying to avoid burden shift. So instead of, and this was referred to also by the presentation earlier, it's important that if by avoiding an impact in one specific stage of the life cycle, we don't create unintended consequences in another stage, for example, or in another impact category, climate change versus biodiversity, for example. Or so we need to make sure that we have whatever solutions we put in place, we need to take them responsibly and knowing all the facts. And life cycle approach to plastic pollution for now is the best method that we have to really avoid trade-offs and burden shifting. Going to the next slide, we have been, in response to a request from member states during the 4th UN Environment Assembly in March 2019, the Life Cycle Initiative hosted in UNEP has been working on gathering information and proposed recommendations on how to handle, if you don't mind going one slide back, please. Okay. So have been basically developing recommendation and gathering information on how to handle single-use plastic product versus alternative, how to compare. And we have been doing that on a number of products, including shopping bags, bottles, takeaway packaging, caps, tableware, nappies, menstrual product, face mask, and food, supermarket food packaging. All of these recommendations have been also consolidated in one report, and we'll be sharing the links to these materials in the chat in a minute. But I wanted to share with you what are the key elements that we have come to. We can move to the next slide, please. I believe there are a few slides missing perhaps, but let me walk you through what are the key considerations that we have come to in terms of reflection for policymaker. So all that we have studied, in fact, shows that reusable products have a lower environmental footprint than single-use plastic products. So a market shift to reuse, it's really a biggest opportunities to reduce plastic pollution. We need to have an integrated approach. And what we have realized, of course, is that the geographic context is very important. So there is not a silver bullet. We need to consider what is the energy mix that is used in the production of the product in your specific context, in your specific countries. What is the source and type of raw material that are used, and what is the waste management infrastructure and the recycling rate that you currently have in your context. The cultural context is equally important. Sometimes we don't consider it, but we have found that actually it's extremely important, especially when it comes to choices by both producers and consumer choices. So the acceptability of reusable alternatives, social norms, the behavior in the use phase, for example, how consumer wash and launder certain goods or wash their products at home, and the access to waste management. It's also important to tell us about the likelihood of littering. So in general, what we have found is that the single use is not the material itself that is problematic, but the single use nature of the product. So we need to really design products more cleverly and use more durable and lighter in weight, specifically when they are, of course, single use, because the lighter the product, the lesser the environmental impact. So we really encourage member states to keep products the longest possible at their highest value in the economy. And if you ever are in doubt, basically choose to reuse. Now, in what you are seeing in this slide, it's basically the fact that there is a very large amount of information already out there in terms of policy development, policy work that is already ongoing out there. If you are not familiar with this inventory search website, so if you Google plastic policy inventory search, you will basically land on the web page where you can search and check examples of laws or policies, regulations that have been put in place in various countries or at the city, so global level, national level or regional, even national level type of policies that have been put in place. And you can search by a particular product of interest. So that's quite a nice resource to try and check relevant policies that might be helpful for in your country context to shape new policy development. And at the bottom, you will see several publications that also provide guidance on scoping and developing single-use plastic products policies. As you can see from this map, the location where there is at least one action on policy development for single-use plastic products, it's pretty comprehensive, and we can see that the spread is really global. Going to the next slide, I want to talk to you through another change. These are 10 factors. So this is summarizing a little bit what I was mentioning before. These are 10 factors for policymakers to consider when using life cycle approaches to inform policymakers on single-use plastic products and their alternatives. As I was mentioning, it's important to promote multiple use a broad range of information sources. So life cycle is a good tool, but it needs to be complemented with the cultural context, with the social norms, etc. It's important to also consider the technology maturity, for example, to avoid lock-in situation. Like, for example, sometimes it has happened in the past in some places where people wanting to address quickly pollution issues have invested in technology such as incineration, for example, but then you lock in yourselves into a technology that requires feedstock. So you are not encouraged to reduce, but rather you need to continue producing for a certain purpose. So these are 10 factors to really consider as you start developing your policy at the local level. Going to the next slide. It's important to notice that in terms of key lessons learned and best practices that we have seen around the world, what works best, in fact, in terms of regulating single-use plastic products, and whether it's a ban, it's a regulation, what worked the best so far that we have seen is really a combination, a mix of policy intervention that can be strengthening, for example, the introduction of EPR systems, so extended producer responsibility, mixed with financial incentive or public-private partnership in specific sector. Those type of example, and here we put on screen a few from different countries. It's really helped to shift the behavior of consumer, but also the underlying economic drivers that make a system work and in a sustainable manner. Next, please. One thing, of course, that we need to always remember when we are dealing with single-use plastic products is the fact that they are so ubiquitous in our daily life that we cannot do without considering behavioral choices of consumers. So behavioral research can provide us with incredible insights on how to engage with consumer, have them come on board, understand why such measures are super important, and make basically the shift together with the consumer. So not leaving anybody behind, both from the industry side in terms of putting in place a just transition, but also from the consumer side to make sure that in terms of implementation, this is actually successful. Going to the next, please. We can go to the next. I will leave with you several more slides so that you can actually also scroll through after the presentation, but I don't need to go in detail of all of them. We can shift to the next slide, please. Because one element, one challenge that we have seen happening around the world whenever implementing bans, regulations, etc., on single-use plastic products, one lack of the lack of monitoring and enforcement is really what is the biggest challenge. Countries do not lack policies. What is really missing is the enforcement of such policies. So to try and create, whenever creating new legislation, making sure that they're implementable and monitor the results. The monitoring helps also with making the policy, maintaining the policy relevant for the country context, the local context, and making sure that is adjusted on a regular basis so that you can really strive to achieve the overall objective that you set to have. Going to the next slide, please. So this is the compilation of studies that I was referring to before, where we basically compare from a life cycle approach all the single-use plastic products versus their alternatives. As you can see, there is quite a comprehensive compilation, and you can access all of these reports on our Life Cycle Initiative website. And I just want to show to you, I have a set of slides below that shows basically a set of matrices that it basically shows, you can go to the next. I won't go into the details of all the rest of the slides, but basically what's nice to show you, it's really a tool that we have developed to map what are the life cycle assessment results that we have, and what are the key drivers that we have to consider whenever assessing single-use plastic products versus alternative. For example, if we go to the next slide, please. This is the example of single-use plastic bottles and their alternatives. So what we have in this matrix, and you will see the same type of matrix for all the various products that we have analyzed, you can see that in a context, so we map in this matrix, what are the considerations of geographical and technological context on the left side. So we start from a context where there is no formal waste management and no recycling. We move into a possibility of a scenario where there is formal waste management, and we finish with a third scenario in the bottom left where there is formal waste management. So we have mapped three scenarios from a consideration in terms of geographical and technological context. On the in the top, instead, we have two scenarios in this case, where reuse is possible or where reuse is not possible. So whenever reuse is possible, what we see here is that the possibilities that, okay, there is safe tap water that is drinkable, or the tap water is not safe to drink. In this case, the main policy recommendation that we have, or what the science tells us really, is that tap water, it's really, we need to try and provide tap water in reusable bottles. If tap water is safe to drink, we should really shift basically from single-use plastic bottles to reusable, providing tap water in reusable bottles. When tap water is not safe to drink, tap water, we need to try and provide shifting from single-use bottles to actually providing services with water dispensers, etc. In a context where reuse is not possible, then you can see that science tells us that there is a mix. Sometimes, in some contexts, reusable still proves better in certain with certain alternatives such as aluminum, stainless steel bottles, etc. In some other cases, science tells us that single use still works better, and these are the pink boxes basically. Single use is still better, which means that in those contexts, we still have to try our best as policymakers to make sure that bottles are used as many times as possible, and we try and work in the infrastructure to make tap water safe. So the shifts can be really structural and massive. We can quickly scroll through the other slides just to show you that the same type of tool we have developed for all the other products.
Dear Claudia, I'm really sorry. You have 2 minutes to complete.
Actually, I'm complete. You can scroll through, as I was saying, you can scroll through the various slides because it's the same type of tool. And here, thank you so much for making the translation into Russian. The tool is available in English. And here in the slides, you see it for taps, for example, with the layer translation in Russian. For these are takeaway food containers, and this is just a recap, basically, of the key messages. So I wanted to close going back to what the key messages from the start were. Really, for us, what is super important is to focus on a system change, starting by reducing the size of the problem. And with that, I leave with you several links and references that are linked to the resources that I was presented. And I thank you very much for the attention and for the opportunity to present in this webinar. Thank you so much. Back to you, Madina.
Thank you so much, Claudia. As a matter of fact, this would probably be a topic, the things that you mentioned, of a whole dedicated additional webinar. And thank you so much for so quickly guiding us through what UNEP has been doing and how it has been helping countries on successful management of plastic and circular economy. Indeed, but remember, the devil is in the details. The deeper we go into the whole effort, the more we start to take into consideration the cultural context, the economic context, the infrastructure context. We need to educate consumers, and absolutely agree that science should be at the basis, at the root of everything. We cannot go ahead and start things from scratch, or we need to provide opportunity, time, and resources for the business community to adapt, to tailor down their processes in such a manner that they act sustainably and responsibly. On this positive note, I would like to open our questions and answers. Dear participants, do you happen to have any questions for our distinguished panelists? This is an excellent opportunity for you to receive answers from them. Now, we can see that we already have questions in the chat box. Inside Travel from Kazakhstan asked his or her question. So you're, sir or ma'am, you're most welcome to turn on your camera and unmute yourself and ask question to either Svetlana or Claudia. Erkin, are you here with us? Erkin's question was, is there a social and green tourism taxonomy available? Well, if Yerkin, now that Yerkin is staying silent, so let me go ahead and read his question.
Is there a social and green tourism taxonomy available, or country is using globally recognized taxonomy? What actions will be for those tourism authorities that do not prioritize sustainable tourism and SDG measurement and management plans related to tourism, culture, and environment pillars close to travel and tourism activities? I believe the question relates to commitments and also constraints and what if the tourist sector, private sector, doesn't fulfill the obligations or doesn't mainstream sustainable development goals in the tourism sector. That's my understanding. That's how I interpret this question. And if you could provide the answer with some cases or reference to specific countries, please.
Thank you so much, Medina. I guess I will start with a few elements of response. But you're absolutely right, there are no sanctions at this stage. So basically, the work that I have been presenting, it's a voluntary commitment frameworks. So the commitments are voluntary. Then having said this, obviously they are First of all, there are more and more public willingness and interest in terms of seeing that the places they are visiting are actually effectively committing and implementing solutions related to plastic pollution, related to climate change, addressing food waste, so on. Because all of these issues, they are more and more visible and people are more and more sensitive to it, right? But indeed, it's the work that I've been presenting is voluntary. Having said this, in my presentation, I have been focusing on the measures that could be implemented specifically by businesses, right? But then we are working also with public authorities. And our great advantage is actually all of the network of ministries of tourism that the World Tourism Organization, our closest partner, have. As an example, we've been working lately with the I don't know if I can disclose the name of the country with which we're working. No, I think I will keep for myself for now the name of the country with which we are working, just to mention that, for instance, with them, we are working very closely on revision of all of their certification schemes, so that in their certification on sustainable tourism, they can include all of the criteria related to circular economy of plastics, related to also our requirements with regards to climate action. And then this basically any business in this country that would want to be certified as a sustainable tourism business, they would have to comply with all of these requirements of our voluntary initiative. So basically, this is an entry point. Entry point is definitely certification. And Adriana mentioned it very, very rightly in the opening remarks. Another point is, of course, working on legislation more broadly. So, for instance, in the Global Tourism Plastics Initiative, we have very, very high hope, obviously, on the process of the treaty negotiation, because we truly hope that it will bring let's say, regulatory transformations on country levels that would allow also the tourism policies align with those, and then making some of the solutions we are promoting mandatory, simply speaking. And then also more on the side of voluntary, how can we push businesses more to implement those? For instance, and I think, Medina, you mentioned this in the opening, we're working with stakeholders such as, for instance, booking.com, so online booking platforms, so that they, in the way they are displaying information and classifying information on their websites, they are putting more forward and promoting more businesses that are actually more sustainable and taking concrete actions in relation to sustainability. So I think there are still a lot of solutions in terms of, let's say, collaboration with public authorities and also collaboration with the private sector that can really help us driving the change from within, even with the voluntary type of commitments. I really hope I answered the question. Over to you, Medina.
Thank you very much, Svetlana. Thank you for your detailed answer. Now, dear colleagues, I can also see another comment in the chat box. And those other participants who would like to ask their questions or who would like to voice their comments regarding the previous two presentations, please do so before we proceed with the comment in the chat box. Let me now go ahead and read out the following comment in the chat box from Mr. Vlad Ushakov. Regrettably, he did not identify his institutional affiliation. Vlad says, regrettably, your presentations lack information about working with local communities. The engagement of local communities, tour operators and tourists could be 1000% eco-friendly. However, if locally the problem of local landfills and unorganized waste dumps is not handled, then we will still have the same problem at hand. In every gorge, we have a huge pile of solid residential waste. Vlad, here, I would like to give the floor to Asel Stambeka, which is exactly what we've been doing at the beginning of our project. So, Asel, we are kindly inviting you to tell us how you work with local communities with the destination Jirgalan in Kyrgyzstan. Asel? Asel, the floor is yours. Perhaps there is a technical issue. Well, let me go ahead and answer for Asel. Now, in our work, we believe that it would be very important to involve as many stakeholders as possible. Anybody and everyone who is involved in the tourism sector. For instance, Destination Jirgalan in Kyrgyzstan, where we collaborated with both the local community, with local governments, and with local businesses. And Natalia Baydakova, a colleague of Asel, would like to go ahead and add a couple of aspects regarding this work. Natalia, the floor is yours. Try to be brief, ma'am. Well, hello. Thank you very much. Regarding the Destination Jirgalan, this is something that I wanted to cover in my presentation, and I wanted to provide more details about how we work with Jirgalan Destination and how we're trying to replicate this positive experience in Georgia. So with your permission, Medina, so as not to waste time and not to be redundant, I will try to talk about it during the course of my presentation. All right, well, thank you very much. It looks like only Yerkin is active. This is an excellent opportunity to ask questions to our esteemed panelists. Now that Claudia and Svetlana are here, so dear rest of the participants, try to be as active as possible. Thank you very much, dear colleagues. Thank you for your very insightful and informative presentation. My question is as follows. For Svetlana. Now we can barely hear Yerkin. I can't make out what he's saying. So in addition to large companies that you've mentioned that are aiming for sustainability, what other smaller players in the tourism sector are you focusing on? Remember, you've mentioned cruise lines and major food producers, but those are big players. How about smaller players? Also, in terms of ESG ranking, what is it that can we do in order to prompt them to be more to be more responsible? Yes, it might not sound very democratic, but is there any leverage that we can utilize? Dear English speakers, we as interpreters, we apologize. The gentleman in question is apparently using mobile internet and working off his phone. We can barely make out what he's saying. Well, I guess we'll give an opportunity for Claudia and Svetlana to respond, but I guess again, the responsibility of producers is definitely a very
Medina,
important topic.
the sound was breaking a bit, so I have understood the second part of the question with regards to behavioral change and lifestyles. Would it be possible to recap the first part of the question?
Yeah, let me repeat in English for your convenience. Do you hear me well now? Yeah, the question
Yes.
Is it possible the initiative is something like social rating, for example, in China? Does it change the behavior of the end consumer? Of course, it might be kind of idealistic. And the other thing is it possible to kind of implement EU border taxation principle towards tourism? So if I produce something for the international market, should I be charged extra on any level, either via the tourist taxation or via transportation mode or any other solutions available? Do you see potential towards that kind of direction? Thank you.
Understood. Thank you so much. I must say I am definitely not an expert on trade, but it's a very interesting question to be explored. In principle, the difficulty that we have when we are working with ministries of tourism is that often many measures that we are promoting with regards to plastic consumption, with regards to CO2 emissions, they are not within the scope of their competences. So basically, when we come to them, if we don't have a clear overview of all of the measures that a Ministry of Tourism itself can implement, they tell us, yeah, sorry, like it's an important issue, but it's not our competence. Go talk to the Ministry of Environment, so on, so on. So usually this type of measures, they are implemented either or interministerial level either from the perspective of responsibilities of ministries other than tourism. To my knowledge, there are no measures that are really specific to that were implemented by tourism authorities specifically. But it's a very interesting question, but I do admit I'm not fully competent to fully respond to the trade-related aspects. When it comes to behavioral change and lifestyles, we have actually some interesting pilots, for instance, in Sweden, where we've been implementing some techniques of how to communicate to consumers, to tourists better, like in a restaurant or like in a shop, so that they have more sustainable types of behavior, for instance, in terms of consumption of plastics. And they give very good results. If the communication messages are very well defined and they are targeting the right audience, which is, so basically, if they are taking into consideration all of the sociological aspects, right, and all of the science behind this. Having said this, I know that it's not exactly your question, and when it comes to really a huge, very high scale pilots like in China, to which we are referring to, I'm not aware about those and the initiatives with which we will be collaborating. It's more nudging type of, so basically how to better communicate so that consumers feel motivated to take action, or just feeling compelled to take action, rather than something that would be coming as an enforcement from the authority side. Over on my side. Thank you.
Maybe to add to that, Madina, if I may, indeed, I agree. There is not a trend that we see happening in that direction, but what we have seen in other countries, for example, is really going back to the combination that I was mentioning before. Whenever it comes to implementing policies, and it requires consumer behavior and consumer engagement, what has proven successful is to make sure that we understand, for example, if it's a matter of having consumer pay a certain fee, a certain tax to discourage a certain type of behavior. What has proven successful, for example, in Ireland, was to run first a survey to understand what is the willingness of consumers to pay. Because if you set, for example, a fee below the consumer willingness to pay, that just gets incorporated into the consumer budget, basically, and won't discourage necessarily a certain behavior. But if you set the fee just above the average consumer willingness to pay, we have seen that actually the negative behavior gets discouraged and reduces. So these links in terms of stakeholder engagement, so having run this survey for some time, monitoring the results also of the implementation, and trying to readjust the policy after a certain period of time, because people adjust also their behavior and time. So whatever seems to be working at first might not be working in 3 years down the line.
Thank you so much, dear colleagues. So I would also like to add a few things on my side. Yes, of course, governments, they're able to regulate this process through some subsidy programs for business, through programs of other programs. There are some economic stimuli for consumers. For example, in Europe, in Germany, in Austria, they also have special machines that accept your plastic bottles, right? You can dispose of your bottles, and then you get like 20 euro cent, 15 euro cent for a bottle. Of course, everyone is interested in collecting these bottles, and then you can use that money for buying certain products. So there must be some economic incentives, if you will, that will be helping us to change our attitude toward the use of plastics. Anyway, dear colleagues, it's been a very interesting discussion, but I have to switch to our next session. So now I would like to turn to Svetlana and Claudia. What would be like the last sort of words that you would like to share? What would you recommend? And what would you like to convey to our region? What do we need to pay more attention to in order to move ahead in this process in the area of tourism? Maybe one or two words.
I can briefly start, but honestly not in a role of lesson giver, because in the end you know better. your context, your realities. What I would like to reiterate again, because I have seen several questions related to, like, we still have issues with waste management. What are we doing with waste, right? And I believe you will be dealing with this issue later on. And in our initiatives, we do work more closely with suppliers, with waste management authorities to tackle this issue as well. That's definitely an ambition. But still, I would like to reiterate that in all of the solutions and initiatives that I was promoting, there is a reason why there is a hierarchy of solutions. When you put less plastics, single-use plastics on the market, there will be less waste. And we have seen countries that piloted, for instance, plastic bans and effectively enforcing them. This can also tackle hugely the issue with regards to the waste. If tourists, they are not incentivized or they have other solutions than using single-use plastics, there will be less waste to deal with in the nature. It will not solve everything. I'm well aware about this, but still I would like to insist on the idea of importance of prevention, of elimination of these issues, and really addressing the issue in its source. I think this would be still absolutely key. Thank you.
Perhaps to conclude and reiterating the message in terms of prevention, I want to maybe conclude sharing an image that Ms. Anderson, our executive director, brought to our attention. It's like, to end plastic pollution, yes, waste management is key. We need to improve the infrastructure, but at the moment, plastic pollution is like a gigantic open tap where things keep coming into the economy, and just putting more buckets to try and capture that whatever pollution comes out from this gigantic tap is not gonna resolve the problem. So from the tourism side, maybe the biggest action is really to try and reduce the amount of products that are put out there and shift to reuse. Thank you very much for having us today.
Thank you so much, dear colleagues. Thank you. Yes, indeed. We have just received a lot of valuable information that, well, we need some time to digest it, right? To digest it so that in the future we could use it. But now, if you're interested, please stay with us, because now we're going to have another session. We'll have more colleagues from the regions making their presentations. This session is called Country Presentations on Green Economy, Implementation of National Strategies, Adaptation and Mitigation to Climate Change through the lens of global initiatives that we heard about from Svetlana. So I also know that we have a presentation by our colleagues from Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan. So I would like to invite my colleague, Asel Arstembekova, to be in the lead in this session and to moderate this session. Hello, dear colleagues. Madina, I am more than happy to take the baton, if you will. And in the second part of our webinar, let us focus more on Go4SDG project, how this project is implemented, or how certain measures within this project are implemented in various Central Asian countries and the Caucasus, and how this is implemented in our country. So first of all, we'll have a bunch of speakers, and they'll be speaking about the national strategies on adaptation to climate change and mitigation to climate change. So now the floor is given to our Kyrgyz side. This will be Ms. Kiyal Kenjimuratova. She is Deputy Director of the Department for Tourism under the Ministry of Economy and Commerce of the Kyrgyz Republic. Kiyal, are you with us? Can you please share what is happening in Kyrgyzstan, how it is happening? Yes, you can turn on your microphone. You can unmute yourself. Hello. Hello, dear colleagues. First of all, I'm very delighted to see all of you here and to be attending this webinar and to be discussing sustainable development, not just in the sector of tourism, but at large among our countries. And in particular in the sector of tourism, because tourism, once again, is a very relevant topic as of today for development and sustainable promotion for us to develop. So I spoke with a number of colleagues, Natalia and Asel, so there are a bunch of other colleagues. So we have regular meetings with them. We are discussing these issues on a regular basis. So for us, it is very important at the state level to introduce best practices that exist as of today. This is something that we need. So this is what Central Asia needs, and this is what the world needs in the modern world, so that we could understand where to start, what to do, and how to do it correctly, how to develop in order for the environment to be protected and also for climate change to be handled. So even if, once again, I understand that all of our human activities in one way or another will be having an impact on the environment. There is no way we can stop it, but still, at least we need to minimize this harm done to the environment. And for us, this year we had a lot of great opportunities, and there are new opportunities coming up within the sustainable development of tourism. So many of our colleagues, as many of you know, back in 2018 and in the late 2018, jointly with the tourism strategy development strategy we also adopted, or we started moving toward sustainable development of tourism. This is the path that we took, and this strategy, it gives us an impetus toward changing the current situation. And ever since, of course, many years have passed, over 4 years have passed, and once again, we have a lot of active changes within our sustainable development. We have a lot of international partners and development partners who are helping us. And also there are some other colleagues who are supporting us. And not only to introduce certain practices. All right, the speaker is breaking up. Not only to introduce technologies, but also this helps us introduce green technologies, and also we can learn more about them, and we can properly develop. Okay. So one thing that I want to, just for your information, I want to also point out that this year we have carried out some work on amending our law on tourism, first of all, introducing the notion of sustainable tourism, and also what it is about. So these concepts, literally, so now our draft bill we're expecting the signature of the president. He will sign it into law, and this will be a country that wants to fully introduce sustainable tourism practices. So we want to sustainably and comprehensively develop the tourism sector. So maybe I will provide a few examples. This year, we also conducted at the state level a campaign. As all of you may know, our regions are also heavily involved. We have 7 provinces in our country. So like Issyk, there is a ban on the use of single-use plastics. So this is a ban in one province. Yes, it is. And so what I'm trying to say, we're talking about single-use plastic, but we're not talking about multiple use or plastic. So we also had discussions with local communities and local residents on how to use, how plastics can be reused, and eliminating single-use plastics. We do have such campaigns. Moreover, we also implement a number of projects, like, for example, jointly within the framework like this, the project that we're discussing now. We're also work with UNEP, and also we work with our domestic companies, and they're very actively involved, and they're actively implementing. So we work with them quite heavily. So we met our colleagues recently ASEL. So we have some good practices already in our country, specifically on sorting out the garbage, and even more so on recycling and the reusing or recycling that garbage or trash. And Kyrgyzstan will be a very active country. We're not only attracting tourists, but also we're trying to develop sustainable tourism that I believe. Okay, the speaker is breaking out. We apologize. So we're also trying to align with the sustainable tourism criteria, or try to comply with SDGs. So where we have certain targets on tourism, so we're actively engaged as well. So thank you so much. Thank you for your attention. And I believe that we will be working more within these platforms. We'll be operating with you more actively, and hopefully we'll be effective. Thank you, Kayal. Yes, indeed, this is true. In Kyrgyzstan, we do have this active garbage reform, as we call trash reform. So we're paying attention to anything relating to waste management and the tourism sector jointly with the tourism department. So we're doing a lot of work. And as was mentioned earlier by our partners in the first part of our webinar, so partnership is one of the main preconditions for these reforms and changes and strategic transformations to be effective, both in Kyrgyzstan and in other Central Asian countries. So pretty much there are so many parties that are interested in this process, and they're revisiting their policies. So I want to give the floor to our next speaker so that we can hear about Kazakhstan's experience, about what activities are carried out. So Ms. Asam, she's a director of the Department on Sustainable Development and Tourism. So I would like to give the floor to you, Asam. You have the floor. Thank you so much. Can you hear me well? Thank you so much for this webinar. These are very interesting topics, so we can barely hear the speaker. All right, can you hear me? Well, Sam, we can, but not very well, because we cannot hear you very well. Maybe you can be louder. All right. As regards Kazakhstan, so I would like to start by saying that in Kazakhstan, since 2015, we have had some efforts, or we've been trying to introduce a concept on transition into green economy. So within this document, we do have some indicators on waste management, and that includes plastic. So by the end of the year, we still have a national project on green economy. Okay, but at this point in time, we are also working very actively on revising this document. So there'll be, in the new document, we will have issues relating to plastic waste management, and also the basics of the circular economy will be included. And also I want to speak a little bit more about our center. This is the Sustainable Development Center that helps our state in achieving a number of important targets from the fundamental documents. And this will be used as a basis. So we talk about sustainable development goals, or a number of important documents that help countries in resolving climate-related issues. And also, I would like to say that within the framework of our center, we've been working for about 5 years. We had a PlusNet network. So remember, SL, we began that work jointly with you here in Kazakhstan. You were working in Kyrgyzstan, wastenet. And this work is specifically aimed at collecting and recycling plastic waste in our countries. As regards PlusNet, In the last couple of years, we have established some communication with all stakeholders.
Over the past 5 years, we've established great cooperation with our stakeholders. As a matter of fact, we are cooperating with those companies and entities that are contributing to the green economic development. We work with the academia, we work with local governments, with local authorities, all a wide range of stakeholders. As a matter of fact, effective since last year, we we've now focused on the tourism sector. We've signed a memorandum of cooperation with the Kazakhstani Association of Tour Operators, our domestic association. We also prepared work plans in this area. And when it comes to plastic waste management, we prepare specific local plastic waste management plans, educating local governments and local communities on how to properly manage this type of waste. We are also working with local community-based tourism operators, the Satay Association, our other major players in the tourism sector. In other words, we're trying to utilize global sets of indicators that would be very representatives as to how good a progress is in local efforts to manage plastic waste. And this is why we're definitely calling on everyone to join us in our efforts to collaborate and replicate successful experiences in other provinces of Kazakhstan and wider Central Asia. I believe there is a great upside to this project. Now, speaking of plastic, what were the contributions? Well, we increased the volume of collection and processing of waste. This is an excellent opportunity as a great resource for the local governments and for local processors. We together with specialized licensed companies, producers, and processors developed a very important guiding document that pertains to the design of packaging. For instance, PET bottles, polyethylene tetraflom bottles. We also talk to processors, like I said, because we needed to learn what the weight should be, what the thickness or width should be. In other words, we needed to make sure that we harmonize technical specifications of the waste coming in for purposes of recycle and their capacities and technologies that are capable of actually receiving that incoming raw material. And we, of course, collaborated with ministries, the National Statistical Committee, and our efforts today are aimed at re-educating youth, instilling new responsible domestic habits and in young people. We're working with local communities, local people, so as to change their habits, introduce behavioral pattern change. We're working with local educators to introduce both new state educational standards, curricula, and other things in order that should help us get the local public to change their behavior, again, starting all the way from the young age. So that's the information that we have regarding Kazakhstan. And if there is anything that you would like to ask me, I will be very happy to answer. Thank you very much. Indeed, I can attest to the fact that indeed in Kazakhstan, tremendous job is being done by both authorities and the private sector to rectify the situation. We're basically working with them to consider joining other global initiatives, including this one, the Global Plastic Initiative, as well as the Glasgow Declaration on Sustainable Tourism. So absolutely, these are the topics that will be the focus of our subsequent cooperation. As a matter of fact, Go4SDG, this regional project for countries of Central Asia and Caucasus, already appealed to all sovereign governments, all public authorities to provide all the information regarding all these initiatives in order to join all these regional forces to help guide all these initiatives domestically and in a consolidated manner, present the findings and results at a regional level to synchronize our watches, so as to speak. Thank you very much, Sam. Regrettably, our Uzbekistani and Tajikistani counterparts are missing today. I can see that in our participant group, there is nobody willing to express their initiative, and therefore, I would like to suggest that we proceed with our next session of our agenda. And this session is dedicated to the implementation and interim results of the Global Opportunities for Sustainable Development Goals, our flagship project, so that we could talk about initiatives that are being implemented by this program in the countries of Central Asia and Caucasus. I would like to notify you, dear esteemed participants, that this is basically an interim progress heads up. This stage will be the project will be implemented until late 2024, and all the pillars, all the strategic areas have been drafted, are being implemented in full compliance with the spirit of the targets and goals of all these global initiatives, in particular the Global Plastic Initiative and Tourism, as well as the Glasgow Declaration on handling climate change in tourism. This work is being conducted under the auspices of UNEP and other UN system sister organizations. And collectively, our efforts are aimed at building sustainable tourism by providing effective partnerships and networking at all levels. Therefore, all our activities are aimed at proper communication, supporting governmental decisions, as well as helping the sovereign governments implement their sovereign plans and policies in sustainable tourism. This project is also aimed at private initiatives, where we're now talking about businesses that are imminently involved in the tourism sector and those that can demonstrate their willingness to help and cooperate. Here, we can also offer tools associated with green certification, as well as other platforms to ecologize, make greener the entire tourism sector. And of course, in response to our question from Vlad Ushakov, indeed, some of the work streams are specifically geared toward the creation of networks, of good communication channels with local communities that are immediately involved in the local tourism. So very soon we will get to know about every single one of these initiatives. And I would like to now give the floor to Natalia Baidakova, who is the project coordinator. And very briefly, Natalia, we welcome your presentation covering the initiatives that are being implemented in Central Asia and Caucasus. Natalia, the floor is yours. And we would like to ask our tech support to put up Natalia's presentation on the screen. Now, if you happen to have any questions, please remember that you can always raise your hand and there will be a follow-up Q&A. Natalia, your presentation is up. The floor is yours. Thank you very much. Hello, dear participants. I would like to now familiarize you with some of the main work streams of our project. Global Opportunities for SDGs implemented as part of this UNEP global program in Europe and Central Asia. Next slide, please. So this project is a regional one, and it covers countries of Central Asia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan, as well as Georgia. The period of project implementation is between September 2023 and April 2024. Our organization, ESG Central Asia, is the operator of this project, one of the co-implementing agencies located in Bishkek, the Kyrgyz Republic. Now, the main components that this project covers include the following. First and foremost, as we can all understand, and already understood as part of this webinar, the first component is to promote targets and objectives of the global initiative in all the countries involved, in the spirit of the Glasgow Declaration, and to facilitate the ratification of these plans. We also want to introduce a new model of behavior in sustainable tourism through awareness raising and outreach, our work in social media, including this webinar. Another component is a research on environmental certification in the tourism sector in the 5 countries of Central Asia. And last but not the least is the pilot private partnership project on waste management with a focus on plastic in a pilot tourism destination, a location in Georgia, and of course, we're trying to replicate a successful example of Kyrgyzstan, specifically in destination Jirgalan. Next slide, please. Now, certainly, this project that we're currently implementing is based and is a logical continuation of all the previous efforts and projects and programs that we've been running since 2023 as part of the pilot project called Sustainable Tourism and Plastic Waste and Food Waste Management. Now, that project's components included the following: arranging a demo system of waste management in a pilot tourism destination called Jirgalan in the Issyk province of the Kyrgyz Republic. That project also had an educational component including the empowerment of women in the tourism sector and the facilitation of policy reform in the tourism sector with regards to waste management, including all the outreach associated with ERP, extended responsibility of producers, producer responsibility, EPR. As to the pilot system of waste management, well, we originally selected a pilot location, a tourism destination, Jirgalan in Issyk province of Kyrgyzstan. It's a relatively small village. However, it's very beautiful. It's located amidst a very wonderful scenery, very appealing to tourists, both domestic and international. And this village was selected specifically so as to create there a proper system of waste management. Now, one of the participants already asked the following question. Indeed, there was an interest of how well we were able to secure a buy-in from the local community, the members of local community who are the owners and operators of local guest houses and hotels, as well as the political will and buy-in from the local authorities. We needed that, and we were able to do so. The beauty of the system was that we were able to introduce a separated waste collection system in guest houses, as a matter of fact, in 16 of them. And we installed a point for the collection of separated waste that was then taken up by processors. And that waste processing and recycling company took all that waste to their plant, where all that waste was recycled into, it was given a new life. Now, the important thing to note is that this project was implemented from revenues to waste and from waste to revenues. In other words, we stimulated the local residents to sell their waste by bringing it in a properly separated manner to the waste collection point, thus earning money and contributing to proper separated waste collection and recycling. So, during the official opening ceremony, during that launch, media coverage was provided by major international publications who were able to not only cover the very opening of the separated waste collection point, but also familiarize themselves with the very history and background of the whole tourism destination, to get this human element into the story, why they decided to collect separated waste, why they're doing this. Next slide, please. Now, as was mentioned previously, this webinar is not the first one. It's actually a continuation of a series of webinars on the very similar, very important topic as plastic waste and food waste management. Well, similar training workshops took place back on November 14th, 2022, when we covered the issue of plastic management. Also, in June 2023, there was a 2-day webinar with a whole day dedicated to the environmental certification in the tourism sector. And of course, this project specifically focused on the role of women in decision-making, dedicated timed to March 8th, the International Women's Day. On March 6th, there was a workshop on the role of women in waste management in the tourism sector, where we discussed such highly important topics as the role of women in waste management amidst the oncoming climate change. We also prepared animated short videos, public service announcements on plastic waste management, food waste management that can be used by by all the participants. These are very nice, short animated short stories. Next slide, please. Now, speaking of the current project, the Global Opportunities for SDGs, we are working to promote the goals of the global initiatives. On plastic and tourism, we submitted official petitions and letters to appropriate state bodies responsible for the regulation of the environment and tourism in all 5 countries of Central Asia. Those official petitions contained information about all the current and upcoming global initiatives with explanations and calls for joining these global initiatives, including the Global Initiative on Plastic and Tourism, as well as the Glasgow Declaration on Climate Change. And of course, like I said, today's webinar comes in vein and in the spirit of these global initiatives, and hopefully will provide an additional impetus and of your understanding and comprehension of the importance of these initiatives. Additionally, in Kyrgyzstan, we conducted a meeting with deputies of all major line ministries and agencies for economy, tourism, and where we discussed this topic, how relevant it is, and how ready Kyrgyzstan is to join these global initiatives. Now, the next project's pillar is the promotion of environmental certification in the tourism sector in Central Asia. As of today, we're preparing a regional study to assess opportunities for the introduction of ecological certification in sustainable tourism in all 5 countries of Central Asia. And as a result, we came up with a recommendation on the introduction of regional requirements for the environmental certification in the tourism sector. And I would like to take this opportunity to note that in each of the 5 countries of Central Asia, we have advisors, consultants, consulting organizations that have tremendous institutional body of experience in the area of environmental certification and waste management. And here on the slide, you can see representatives of each individual organization representing each country that contribute to our efforts. More details about how this study was conducted and what exactly had been done will be covered in my next presentation, so I'm not going to dwell on this one here. Next slide, please. Now, there is another pillar, another component, is the replication of the successful positive experience from the Jirgalan destination in Issyk province, Kyrgyzstan, which we again now are replicating in Georgia. In Georgia, we selected a pilot tourism location, Asureti. It's called Asureti, where we intend to introduce a system of separated plastic waste management predominantly, and trying to realize all the lessons learned from Kyrgyzstan. Currently, we're conducting a preliminary assessment of the situation at hand in the tourism location to be followed by the separated collection and sorting and accounting for all the waste in that pilot territory, which will be something to be covered by our counterpart from Georgia. Next slide, please. Now, take into consideration the fact that the 2 main components here are environmental certification and the pilot system of waste management in Georgia, which will be covered by my Georgian counterpart. That would be the official end of my presentation. Again, that was a very brief overview of the main direction of our project, which will again run through April 2024. It will officially end in late March, early April, after which we will be ready to, I mean, of course, even today, we're ready for all your ideas and comments on how we can make this project even more successful. If you happen to have any questions, we'll be happy to answer them. Absolutely. Thank you very much, Natalia, for your statement. I would like to now call on all the participants and remind them that we are being active
and we interact with all stakeholders. So if you have any suggestions or any comments for us to implement our goals and objectives, we're always open for cooperation. We're there for you. And before we switch to our next most expected presentation, I would like to ask all of you to turn on your cameras for us to make a photograph, a joint photo for us to capture our today's discussion. So please turn on your cameras if it's possible. And if it's possible, let us capture this image, the history. So I want to welcome. Yes, I'm very happy to see our colleagues from all Central Asian states. We see Georgia is here, and it's great. We have a lot of experts that have gathered today. All right. All right, not everyone turn on their cameras, but if possible, please do so. Turn on your cameras. All right, just whoever wishes to turn on their cameras, and they'll be part of our photograph. All right, thank you so much. It would be great if we had a chance. Please stay, keep your cameras on for us to see your eyes, for this partnership communication to be more active, more effective. This is a lot more fun to work. So now you know about our project, about those initiatives that are going on within the framework of Go4SDGs in 5 Central Asian states, as Natalia mentioned, and also in the Caucasus. But in particular, we're working only with Georgia at the moment. So I would like to suggest that we switch to our next presentation for us to see what activities are carried out on assessing the situation and developing ecological certification in tourism. In this case, we'll be discussing certification in sustainable tourism. And I want to give the floor to our expert, our key speaker for today, Ms. Yulia Grachova. She's a consultant of our project. And also she's a member of the Global Labeling Network, and she's part of the labeling program. So we'd like to invite Yulia. Yulia, are you with us? Can you please put on her presentation on the screen, put on her presentation on the screen for us to discuss the findings of the research. As all, I can see some people here who were part of this research and they were part of some activities. So I believe that the findings will be very interesting for you, but they're still tentative. Yulia, you have the floor. Yulia, can you hear us? All right, Yulia. So Asel, while Yulia is getting connected in the chat, there is a question here. All right, please go ahead. So what specific outcomes have you achieved on introducing a project in Jergalan local administration? Did it operate with your experts? Did you have any challenges? So can you briefly tell us? Natalia, should I do so? Or yes, as regards what was done as a result of our work in Jergalan. Okay. First of all, we directly worked with the tourist destination in Jergalan, and in and of itself, this is an ecologically responsible, environmentally responsible, and quite some many times they implemented projects which were ecological projects, and they were specifically aimed at environmental protection and other issues. And also this was the issue of waste management was also of interest to them, so they were quite interested in changing something in their own village. Also, we closely worked with the local administration, this is correct, and they participated in all of our meetings and all of our workshops and activities. And the local administration, they also, so they provided a space for reception points. And a person who was working there currently, he's part of the administration. So in 12 guest houses, we introduced sorting out of garbage. So we had separate containers for trash containers for separate garbage collection. So, and also on how to sort out the trash and on how to do this, we provided this information within the workshops. Also specialized points And garbage collection points were also established. They also had separate containers. We also introduced scales and a press, a hydraulic press for the waste that was brought. So this could be compressed, and of course we could collect more as a result. And also the destination Jergalan and the recycling facility in the neighboring village Shakso, they signed an agreement that the recycling facility will be taking this waste and then this will be transporting it to its own facility for recycling purposes. And at the same time, there were some financial agreements, so this waste was purchased for a certain amount of money. So now the system is also in place. It's still working, up and running. And regrettably, I believe we do not have a representative of this destination. You can always ask her a question. Quite recently, we also had a workshop where she shared her experience with representatives of other ecological points that are getting established. She was sharing her experience about the advantages and disadvantages. So I hope I was able to answer that question. Yes, I also want to add that in May 2023 probably, we met with a delegation of journalists from over 20 media outlets, foreign media outlets. And this experience of introducing the waste management system in the Jergalan destination, this was covered by there were over 90 materials that were published abroad in some leading media outlets abroad. And once again, over 20 video materials were also presented and published by our colleagues from various countries, including European countries and American media outlets, Turkish and Chinese media outlets. We're very proud of this fact because in this small area, we were able to create a waste-free, garbage-free tourist area. We're able to demonstrate how tourism facilities were able to concerted their efforts, and they were supported by local self-governance bodies and the whole infrastructure that was developed and established. And so we're very proud that this experience works. It is also being passed on to other Central Asian states, like Natalia just said. Yes, indeed, all across the country, such garbage collection points are being established. And quite recently, this experience was also replicated, or was passed on to the new organizers of collection and waste collection points. So I believe that the experience and approaches to waste management in the tourism areas, this will be further replicated in all Central Asian states and the Caucasus, and also this can be a very good driver and a good example for other regions. So Yulia, are you with us? Yulia was a little bit late. Yes, I'm here. Yes. So Yulia, you have the floor. Please tell us more about the current state of play with respect to the research, and also please share what findings and recommendations you came up with and what can be shared with our audience. Yeah, thank you so much, dear colleagues. Hello, apologies for being late. I had a bit of a overlap in my calendar. Anyway, I'm ready to tell you more about what we're doing, about what we were doing in the last couple of months, the research study that we have conducted to assess Central Asia's readiness to introduce regional norms for sustainable eco-certification, tourism certification. The next slide. All right, somebody will be helping me with this. So I'll introduce some basic information first. I'll speak about eco-certification, sustainable certification. What is it all about? And why so many international donors and experts are working so actively in the area of sustainable certification, eco-certification. First of all, this is an ecological economic tool that is recognized as valid in the rest of the world as an effective tool to achieve and accomplish SDGs. Why is it effective? Because on the one hand, we have clear, strict, understandable standards that facilities must comply with. On the other hand, we have an ecological mark or ecological certificates with this is a certain bonus that can be received by a facility if they comply with these standards. These are voluntary standards, and they do not go above and beyond the legislation. So this is the norm that helps us accomplish SDGs as effectively as possible. And therefore, when a company complies with the standards, when they get certified, then in the market, they have some benefits. They have a competitive benefit, and also there is more interest from consumers and tourists. They have a higher reputation, and they can also streamline their internal processes. And this can lead to lowering the burden on the environment and resolving some social aspects. So therefore, it's a very nice tool. I love it myself. I've been working with this tool for about 15 years, and I'm very happy that we do have a chance to test this instrument and tool in Central Asia. So now the next slide. So here are some stats that pretty much confirms the effectiveness of the tool. Yes, indeed, in the tourism sector, as a result of a survey that was carried out by Booking.com, as you can see, tourists all over the world, even now, and this could be seen also from the interviews with international experts that we conducted. So many hotels, they see a higher demand from tourists for environmental practices in hotels, like sustainable practices. This is important for tourists, and that's why hotels are also involved in this. The next slide. Like I said earlier, we've been working on this study in Central Asia, and this region, as all of you, you know the region better than me, so very often this region works as one monolith region in many projects, also from the perspective of tourism. International strategies are developed to develop this region, and also including the tourism capacity. So in our project, Go4SDG Central Asia, our goal was also to look at this region as one unified region. Because we have tourists coming into the region, they normally travel to several countries at the same time. And so we try to come up with some common standards and practices that could be introduced in sustainable tourism in the entire region. And this is exactly what we were trying to focus on in our research. The next slide I'll speak a little more about the research. So this is the goal of the project. We wanted to assess the existing situation. Right now, this is a market research. We're trying to understand what we have at the moment, what the situation is, what legislation the region has, what the tourism potential is all about, what projects are being implemented. And also on the basis of all this information, we want to assess the region's readiness to introduce unified standards for sustainable tourism and sustainable certification of these standards. So right now, we're at the stage, so we conducted the research study. We have some tentative findings, and in the next part, we'll have recommendations. So this will be done a little later, and we'll be very happy. We'll be anticipating your comments. So the next slide, I'll speak more about the methodology. So here, everything was pretty much standard. We collected information by various means. So the desk research. I want to thank our consultants from all of 5 Central Asian states that were helping us garner information. They were helping us with the conclusions. And also information was taken from open sources, also on the basis of competences and those organizations with which we worked in each country. So we were trying to look at these processes from inside. Also, the next one, focus groups. We had 3 focus groups. I'll speak a little more about this later. And then in-depth interviews with international experts. In other words, a glimpse from outside. So let's go to the next slide. So what was done within our desk research? The organizations that were helping us collect information, they're listed on the right side. I want to thank our colleagues for their assistance. We were collecting information for the report based on several categories: statistics in the area of tourism, also the standardization and certification, legislation, how it works, and how this can be possibly, and how international approaches can be possibly introduced, and also what international projects exist, in every country. We made some general conclusions, both for each country individually and for the region at large. So the next part is focus groups. So within this work, we were not simply working with information from the internet, or we were working with real people. So we had 3 focus groups in November. So in every focus groups, we had the participation of representatives from all Central Asian states. So the first group was comprised of public authorities, state institutions like committees and ministries and agencies that in one way or another are involved in sustainable tourism or ecological regulation in the region. The second group, these were our experts in the area of eco-certification. We had representatives of public foundations and associations working on eco-certifications, representatives of the academia, university, representatives in international projects, and also competent experts on standardization and certification. Of course, professional associations, for example, the Association of HoReCa sector, all those who work in the tourism sector. And the last group, these were the accommodations. I also want to mention that in our project, when we talk about tourism, when we talk about tourism sites, we mostly mean accommodations. So we're not talking about destinations per se. We're not talking about tourist operators. We're talking about accommodation facilities where tourists normally stay. So this was our target group that was targeted within our project. And also we had representatives of focus groups. We had 4 or 5-star hotels involved from all of the above mentioned countries. And the third part of our research, like I said, these were in-depth interviews with international experts. And of course, this is a Council on Sustainable Tourism. This is UNEP. This is also Booking.com as one of the drivers of a sustainable market. This is the World Eco-Labeling Network, Global Eco-Labeling Network. This was also the African labeling from Kenya. So they work in the East African region on developing some standards, can be a benchmark for us. And also the Trevindi Agency. These are the experts working in the area of sustainable tourism, consulting, and audit. So therefore, we also had a lot of discussions with them. So individually, for every interviewee, we had separate questions. Now all of these interviews are being deciphered. You can see all of the main issues that were raised in our interviews. And first of all, adapting international standards and lessons learned. And of course, first of all, these were the risks that they see in a certain project on introducing the unified regional standards, and also the recommendations that they could provide. So pretty much, let us switch to the conclusions or our findings. So our findings are still preliminary and tentative. We're still processing this information. We'll be involving more stakeholders as we develop our hypotheses. In my presentation, I have a lot of findings. How many minutes do I have left, Asel? Who's the timekeeper? Can you tell me how much more? Half of the time. You used half of the time. All right, I'll be quick. There is a lot of text here, so I'll try to be very quick, and I'll focus. In the last slide, I try to structure our findings. Our findings can be divided into those conclusions that we came up with when we explored the region from inside. These were focus groups and desk research. So what are some of the general features? First of all, a high tourist potential for developing regional tourism, and also a higher tourist flow from people from abroad, from remote countries. And this, once again, will have an impact on the recommendations that we can come up with. Also, the uneven development of the region. Some countries, let's say, are more ahead, let's put it this way, and they introduce, let's say in Kyrgyzstan, there are a lot of international projects in various areas, and they accumulated a lot of experience. So they start their first certification processes. In some other countries, they're just at the early beginning, in the early stage. In Turkmenistan and Tajikistan, they do not yet have experience introducing international standards. In Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, they have very interesting experience in a sense that in Uzbekistan, they had a very interesting case on introducing the state eco labeling, and in Kazakhstan is not. This is the private eco certificates. So every country, in fact, can offer something for us to develop findings and recommendations. So those projects that were implemented already, of course, this will be a substantial impetus for developing this topic, and also the competence of experts is growing. People know more about the topic now than in the past. At the same time, there is such a challenge as some projects are not sustainable. When the project is over, there is no more funding, and very often the project stops, and certain activities may stop. And this is something that has to be remembered.
Now, couple more conclusions regarding the government regulation legislative framework. And here we would like to note that pretty much in every single country where we're working, there is a strategy on the development of sustainable tourism, and some into which some of the SDGs had been incorporated. Then there is another interesting component related to the certification and how the legislation regulates that standardization and certification. Now, there is a side note that the legacy legislation among all countries of Central Asia is very similar, and therefore this is something that you need to take into consideration every time we speak about the introduction of new international standards and norms. They must be harmonized in a mandatory way into the national legislation in the area of standardization and certification. As to our target audiences, the hotels, guest houses, the HoReCa sector, absolutely, all of them are stand willing and ready. They're interested in the green standards. They're interested in trying to get themselves green certified, environmentally certified, to see whether or not they're compliant. And at the same time, there are challenges. The major challenge voiced by them is the fact that there is a lack of motivation, incentives, if you will. Hotels must understand why they need that certification. What is it in there for them? Perhaps preferences from the government, demand from the market, subsidies, benefits, or any other incentivization available in the international practice to encourage such hotels and operators to undergo voluntary certification. This is a challenge that was voiced during our, as a concern during our review. Now, this slide contains recommendations of international experts. Our international experts provided similar conclusions, if you will, although their conclusions differed somewhat, but most of them pertain to the fact that indeed it is imperative that we create encouraging mechanisms, including by way of introducing a policy framework, policy measures. Absolutely, it is important to utilize international certification systems. At the same time, it is important for each hotel, for each guest house, to have something unique, to have something that would be peculiar and adapted, tailored down to the specificity of their jurisdiction, for them to use as a compass of sorts, as some kind of a beacon of light for other operators. And for them, we would need to come up with ambitious targets, so that all other aspiring companies could understand that, look, if we achieve that certification, it means that we have accomplished, that we have reached a major threshold. Through that, we could cover all the various areas. Other recommendations included the fact that indeed, as a high bar for which we are striving and for which other companies should be striving, we should utilize examples of certification of hotels, for instance, five-star hotels, so as to show to their colleagues that it is actually possible that corporate standards can converge on the requirements of voluntary standardization and certification. Also, with international experts, we discussed various approaches to different criteria. The so-called process approach, where we establish a set of criteria for certain hotels or guest house, or criteria-based preferences, limiting preferences, if you will, when a certain hotel must be compliant with a certain rigid minimum standard, set of standards and requirements, because it would make it easier for operators to understand those criteria as long as they're structured and down to the point. And last but not the least, I wanted to cluster a matrix of the findings of our SWOT analysis, where we can see all the strengths and weaknesses of this region as a uniform destination for the application of the standards in sustainable tourism, including opportunities and threats. And this goes in vein of what I already said. Among the strengths, we can mention the general direction, the common grounds for all of them, and the overall collective desire to participate in the development of sustainable tourism, presence of experts and international projects. The weaknesses include low awareness as well as lack of funding, funding time and personnel for the which is needed to introduce standards in sustainable tourism. Among the opportunities, we can mention uh, concurrent or parallel stories that we can discuss. On the one hand, being the approximation of international certification, whether tailored down or directly copied. And on the other hand, on the other side of the end of the spectrum, we can see an opportunity for the development of a uniform regional standard that structurally would be replicating international best practice. So through that, we could help it harmonize the national domestic system of standardization and certification with international best standards. And among the threats, that is among other opportunities, we could mention gradual introduction of recommendations and certification at all levels. Among the threats, it's the dependence on donor funding, lack of sustainability of programmatic results after a certain project or program ends. In other words, we have to think from the very beginning at the stage of project design, how sustainable this project would be and its outcomes and results after the project ends. And then dependence on donor funding and the strong impact of the government, as well as poor regulation in the system, in the certification system. Again, these are the preliminary findings. We will be clarifying them. We'll be very much looking forward to receiving feedback from you. We're inviting you for a discussion. We definitely want to get to listen to your recommendations, how we can bridge all those gaps and controversies. All these elements here on the slide that have question marks in red are exactly the points for which we're seeking your input. In other words, what is it that we can do to introduce uniform regional standardization certification standards in a sustainable and successful manner? Thank you very much. That'll be the conclusion of my presentation. I'll be very happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you very much. Thank you. Again, dear colleagues, a kind reminder that these are preliminary findings. There are still a lot of questions to be answered. There is still a question of how the regional market will develop in the direction of sustainable tourism and certification. A lot will depend on local tour operators and players, as well as the positions and policies mentioned by our international experts as part of the study that was conducted. Now, dear esteemed audience, should you happen to have any questions or comments, you're most welcome to voice them or to post them into the Zoom chat box. Perhaps you have other additional questions. Regina Gataulina from Kazakhstan. Regina, could you please introduce yourself and then go ahead and ask your question? Regina, the floor is yours. Regina, are you with us? Yes, Regina, you are most welcome to unmute yourself. Yes, can you see and hear me? Absolutely, we can hear you loud and clear. My name is Regina Gataulina. I'm from Kyrgyzstan. I work as an sustainable tourism expert in the Green Tour project of Helvetus, by Helvetus. I very carefully listened to Yulia's presentation. I liked it very much, especially all those problematic concerns mentioned by our international experts. And I would like to note that I fully agree with your statement that the standards that were drafted by the World Tourism Organization have to be tailored down and then pitched to the region. Because having worked in this project by Helvetus Green Tour and having helped local tour operators undergo international certification, I encountered the fact that some standards were simply unattainable, unfeasible. For instance, if we look at a very rank and file small hotel or a cafe or any other HoReCa operator, they might face a standard where they're asked, how do you minimize the consumption of meat? But then remember, the Central Asian region boasts the tradition of the consumption of meat, right? We are notorious for pretty much having every single national dish containing meat. So certain standards are very difficult to adapt or to introduce directly, to replicate, to mirror directly, simply due to cultural considerations. Thank you very much, Regina, for your comment. Indeed, I agree. I agree. There are certain standards. We did receive comments to your effect. Indeed, it's great when we have process criteria and standards. For instance, requirements for presence of a certain procedure. But at the same time, sometimes it's unclear just to which degree the standard should be further developed or implemented. For instance, waste management, for instance, right? So definitely we need to seek a common ground. We need to seek a balance where the stringent procedure is implemented and at the same time cultural considerations, cultural aspects, cultural are taken into consideration. So yes, I agree with you. Absolutely. Thank you very much for your comment. There is another question in the chat box. Elvira is wondering about the best practices in motivation. Are there any best practices in incentivizing local HoReCa operators to actually accede to these standards? Absolutely, absolutely. I'll go ahead and answer first. Indeed, in my conclusions, I mentioned that we have to look at benchmarks, and motivation of certification is a cornerstone of the whole process. We in the international community keep talking about that. Um, the first thing that comes to mind every time we mention words like incentives or motivation, well, these are incentives and motivation by the government through green procurements. And in the case of hotels, that could be some kind of a social contract coming from the government or a requirement set by the government for the green certification. There is a good example. A lot of international experts I talked to provided an example of Turkey, Master Galis, how Turkey was able to introduce the system of sustainable tourism, where the government mandated all the Turkish hotels to undergo green certification in the area of sustainable tourism. It's a Turkish government mandated standard on sustainable tourism that works very well. The same story is in Singapore, another good success story. It doesn't have its own sovereign standard. So what, like in Turkey, so what they do, they directly implement SGC, Sustainable Tourism Council standards, which was pretty much harmonized into national legislation, which tremendously facilitates the implementation of international standards. Another good example of market regulation for the creation of preferences. Here, I would like to note successful experience in the eco-labeling from the World Environmental Association. The Northern Swan, the Russian eco-labeling, actually it's more related to food rather than hotels, where where there is no specific, say, motivation coming from the government or incentive coming from the government. However, for purposes of a development of an eco-labeled brand, the incentive coming from the very tour operator, say a HoReCa operator, that look, you can utilize your eco-labeling tool in order to promote yourself. But for that, hotels would need to contribute funds. They would need to invest as long as they understand that they would get a competitive edge compared to their rivals as long as they do so. So that's an excellent marketing ploy where we could provide incentives without any externality, without any external motivation, a sort of an incentive that drives them from within to improve their reputation, to improve their image, for purposes of visibility, so that all their clients know that they're making every effort to be compliant with stringent international standards. I agree. Thank you very much. As a matter of fact, a procurement system can be implemented through a corporate filter, right? Through, say, non-state, non-public organizations can too introduce principles in ecological, environmental, sustainable procurement of goods and services and works. They can do that through mass media. They can do that through other platforms that support certification. Now, Elvira submitted a clarifying question related to benefits. But what is it there for the private sector? What does the private sector receive in exchange for a certification? What are the benefits? What are the distinct, tangible advantages that the private sector would like to enjoy, see, and touch? Elvira, one of the participants, asked me to ask you this question. Well, as to the benefits, right? Again, benefits would include a higher demand coming from, in this case, tourists that would come to that hotel. Remember, I showed you on the second slide rankings on booking.com, and my colleagues from Africa actually mentioned that as well. I asked them, why do your African hotels so willingly and voluntarily undergo certification? And the answer from my African colleagues was that hotel managers and operators and owners can see such a demand coming from tourists. So if we dig deeper, we can pretty much come up with specific figures with quantitative results. In our eco-labeling, we can boast the following: an uptick in sales or joining export markets. For instance, the Kando company, any company that receives such certification, it becomes an industry leader. It can actually boast specific increase in sales. These are hard numbers, specific evidence that could very much attest to the successfulness of this whole process. In other words, there are analytical pieces of study, both domestic and international, that can provide economic, hard data to support the statement. Another aspect of benefits, well, when it comes to internal processes, when we communicated through social media, the request was to come up with specific cases, success stories for, say, international hotel chains, where, say, City Scandi, right, hotel, certified, try to estimate how much electricity they were able or water they were able to economize on to save over a year as a result of their transition to a new technology to be compliant with a certain international standard. So once they introduce certain measures, and again, the introduction of these measures doesn't necessarily have to be accompanied by green certification. However, the green certification is a great benchmark. It's a great badge of honor, and that could be translated into money. There is this hotel, Corinthia, in St. Petersburg. So over the past 3 years, we helped them estimate how well they were able to decrease the amount of unsorted waste and how much money they were willing to minimize, to save, and how much money they were willing to generate by selling such properly sorted, separated waste. So those are excellent corporate examples. Thank you very much. I guess we will field a couple more questions because apparently there is high interest coming from the participants. Dear Mr. Mustafin, the SDG Center, you had a question. Yes, thank you, dear colleagues. Dear colleagues, I apologize. I cannot turn on my camera. If I turn on my video camera, my internet connectivity will not allow me to properly ask my question. First of all, I would like to thank all the speakers. It was highly needed, absolutely. I would like to talk about regional processes. Indeed. Every time we mention regional standards, we have to remember about the fact that we have differing domestic sovereign systems of standardization and certification. Some of the countries of Central Asia are member states of the Eurasian Economic Union. Some of the countries of Central Asia are not. Therefore, for instance, Uzbekistan has a system of its own that is not compliant with the Eurasian Economic Union standard, regional standard. So the question is, that perhaps we should come up with a regional state standard. However, all the countries would need to ratify it for it to be effective, because otherwise it would not be mandatory. So here I can see certain regulatory and intergovernmental difficulties, if you will. However, I absolutely agree that this system would be highly useful, if you will, as long as we can make it a state standard. Now, another problem with the promotion of the standard is that in countries of Central Asia, we mostly certify foodstuffs. Here, in this case, we're certifying processes or services, right? So we could also look at them specifically as services. However, certification and standardization of processes and services is an emerging topic, is a novelty in the countries of Central Asia, including Kazakhstan. And this is why we still lack institutional sovereign experience in implementing such certification systems for organizations, right? As long as we can certify a certain organization to as a company that renders green services, if you will, right? So here,
so there are no certification bodies. So therefore, this is a difficulty. Of course, international standards may be directly introduced. For example, international certification bodies, they normally certify the ISO, the so-called ISO, IO 14,000 and 18,000 and so on. However, yes, gradually these standards are adopted either in modified countries, and then certification is taking place by national bodies. And the third thing, which is important, yes, indeed, you mentioned the regulated organizations. Now in Kazakhstan, we have a law that was passed a couple of years ago on self-regulation. We already partially have such services that are self-regulated on a mandatory basis, but most of them are voluntary. So, and they're at some point they'll be switched to compulsory ones. The reason I know about it because I represent KazWest. This is an association on waste management, KazWaste. So we're a self-regulated organization, a voluntary one. We also have a certain standard, mandatory standard, and then we certify organizations, those companies that manage waste in accordance with this standard. And I believe that at least in Kazakhstan, there is a good opportunity. Well, I forgot whether or not so we have two major associations on tourism in Kazakhstan. So if they are certified, I mean, it's easier to do within this certification method. So this CRO method, that as we call it, it can be developed based on your national standards, and thus this can be introduced. Also, we're also interested in this issue, and we also have a technical committee. We have a technical committee. We have this is a committee on circular economy and sustainable production and consumption. So all of these standards, they are part of our technical committee's competence. So therefore, I believe that it makes sense to be in touch with us. You can work with us, with our specialists. So maybe you can speak at the technical committee. We can also invite tourist operators and tourist associations to participate if the project is going to continue, and if there's a chance, then we are ready to for this process and to be involved in this process. This is an important process. Okay, thank you. So thank you so much. This has been a very valuable comment. Yes, indeed. So we had technical procedures participants from the tourist community that were part of our focus groups. As far as I remember, we were also discussing the national standardization systems and certification systems and the global standards for them to unify them somehow and to introduce them. So yes, indeed, we will cooperate in the future. Regrettably, we're lagging behind our agenda. So in the chat, we have one more question relating to ecological certification and specific requirements to food produce, organic produce. Yulia, can you answer in the chat? And then if I may, we will continue. So we'll have our last presentation in order to stay within keep up with the time. If you have any questions on certification sustainable tourism, or if you have any suggestions, or if you want to provide any comments and cooperate, you can do this in the chat. You can send your contact information to us. We're open, and yes, indeed, we'll be checking those hypotheses and those conclusions and findings that were presented today. Thank you, Yulia. So I'd like to give the floor to our last speaker. So this is also the experience that we discussed before Yulia took the floor. It had to do with how in tourist destinations or recreational zones on how they introduce waste management systems, as we heard earlier. So now we're trying to ensure experience transfer. And now Ms. Tatiana Remneva will be speaking. She is the Director General of the Parque Arminda. Hello, Tatiana. She is a partner in Georgia. You have the floor now. Please, can you please put up her presentation on the screen? Hello, everyone. So thank you for having me. Thank you for introducing me. Yes, indeed, we're very happy to be a part of your program on introducing the waste management practices in the various destinations. We're at the pilot stage of separate collection in a small destination that I will speak about a little later. My name is Tatiana Remneva. So if we go to the next slide, I will say a few words about our organization. We are a non-for-profit eco-educational project. So very soon we'll be 5 years old. And so Parque Arminda in Georgian means I don't want to see plastic bags. Our main purpose is reducing plastic contamination, plastic pollution, and plastic waste management. So this is a very relevant topic for Georgia. So in order to implement and fulfill our mission, can we go to the next slide? We are implementing not only activities on, let's say, public awareness or some educational activities and so on, but we're also trying to participate in the development of infrastructure for a separate waste collection. So in 2021, we were the main contractor for UNDP. So for their labs, and also we carried out a project of sorting out the garbage in separate waste collection. It was the first project in Georgia with some elements of a sociological and psychological research, if you will. This project was very successful. It is still up and running. And in Batumi, we already had the replication of this project. So now we're in the third stage. We're planning to up in Tbilisi. We're still in the process of doing so, but everything works. Things work quite effectively, and we're very happy about this. We also collect materials, waste materials themselves. This is the secondary waste materials in Georgia. We have eco taxi services, 3 collection points, and now to make this closer to the public, or to make it more convenient for the public, we created a map. And in this map, you can see not only our collection points, but all other collection points where you can bring your waste. Now, in continuation of our activities, we're very happy to be a part of this project, Go4SDGs, and to launch a pilot project outside of larger cities. In a small place, we selected a tourist destination that is called Asureti Village. It is located about 40 kilometers away from Tbilisi. And this is located in Tetriskara municipality. Compared to other regions of Georgia, it has a good tourist potential. However, it is not yet fully developed yet. And the government or the authorities of this region, they're putting in a lot of efforts to bring in more tourists and foreign tourists, not only foreign tourists, but also local residents, Georgian nationals. So Asureti, this is one of the outstanding examples. This village is very famous because in the 19th century, there were Germans living in this settlement. So the official version is They were brought by Ekaterina II, the Tsarina of Russia. And also there is the unofficial version that these Germans were following a certain belief. So they believed that at a certain point in time, we'll have the end of the world, and they'll be able to save their souls if they live next to the Ararat mountain. And this is how they came to Georgia. That's the unofficial version. So now in this village, regrettably, so there are no direct descendants of German settlers. They were all deported back in the 20th century during World War II. However, we have some houses, we have the old German cemetery, we have the old church, and by 2016, everything looked pretty bad, and local authorities, by attracting some donor funding in 2016, they launched a full-scale project to reconstruct this whole village. And now in the pictures, you can see the renovated, refurbished houses and the streets. So a lot of work has been done to make it look more modern. So we have a lot of German tourists coming to this village, and this place is quite popular with local residents as well, because this is a place where first, so people come there for nature. There are some natural spots, and also there are some reserve areas, and there are some other sites, things to see, some sightseeing locations. Can we go to the next slide? So the tourist infrastructure in Asorati is not yet very much active, but it is being developed. A couple of years ago, next to the village, so a gypsy village project emerged. They call themselves as a park hotel. This is like a space for conducting activities. They have their own organic kitchen garden, and this is a great place to spend a weekend or to go there in the summer. And they have been supporting the idea of separate waste collection. They were doing this independently, and they're very happy that they'll be able to do this in a more centralized and effective manner. Last year, we also had a new restaurant that was established. It's called the Bahnhof. This is the German word for a railway station. And not only tourists, but also local residents come there as well. The people go there in the evenings or during the weekend. There are some other cafes and restaurants. Since the region is a wine region, so there are interesting wineries as well, vineyards and wineries. They also accept tourists, except for producing wine. So we have a beer brewery. We have a couple more wonderful places relating to winery. This is the old German winery, and there are plans to reconstruct it. So not so many guest houses are there, and there are no hotels, but still, many of them are those that exist. They actively, I said, they agree to participate in this project. And in particular, we were very happy to get the support of the local authorities, local municipality. Except for tourist infrastructure, they also want to have the local school involved in this project in order to conduct education activities with children. And of course, we'll be very happy to do so. And we can go to the next slide. So I have one slide in English, and then I have another one in Russian. So you'll see it later. Now, so what is this project is all about, except for the negotiations and that we had with the tourist and recreational infrastructure and getting the agreement from municipalities. The next stage is establishing containers for separate waste collection. This is the stage we're at. These will be the containers that we're going to be using. They can be used inside buildings, indoors, not outside. And they will be controlled by the people working in these guest houses or restaurants. So all containers will have stickers, labels in two languages. We'll have containers for PET. This is the largest, the most highly demanded type of waste for paper and for aluminum. So we're in the process of preparing a warehouse, a storage facility that will be working as a collection point for recycling materials from the public. And once our infrastructure is ready, we were planning to conduct a number of education activities, both with infrastructure and facilities and also with all village dwellers. We have about 2,000 people, 500 houses living in this village. In addition to that, we'll spread information not only in this village, but also in some neighboring villages that are located very close. And they can also be involved in the collection because in this region, so until now, there were no possibilities for a separate waste collection. And these are the places for summer cottages, and people come there in the summer. So this is becoming a densely populated area. So as a result, we have a lot of plastic waste and aluminum cans and so on. And of course, when everything is collected, it is very important to effectively and transparently take it out of the area. So this is part of our work, and this is establishing a logistical system, the system for transporting the collected recycling materials either directly to recyclers or so in the region, 40 kilometers away, we have the largest plastic recycling facility. The paper recycling facility is in Tbilisi, like I said, 40 kilometers away. So the aluminum will be taking it to a different company because we don't have aluminum recycling companies. Of course, the entire collection will be accompanied by monitoring, and so there'll be some feedback, and possibly as a result of the first monitoring, the first collection efforts, we'll have some additional informational sessions. This is something that is needed in order to demonstrate using concrete examples to point to different mistakes and to help them continue to do this in the right way. Well, I believe, speaking briefly, this is it. This is what we're doing at the moment. Thank you. Thank you, Tatiana. Yes, indeed. These are some interim findings, if you will, or results, and this work is still in progress. It's going to be completed in 2024. I'm convinced that Asureti will become a very progressive tourist center with a high demonstration level. You know, you'll have a lot of responsible tourists coming to your country, and this will help minimize environmental damage. And I hope that all guests and participants of our webinar will visit Georgia. Once they're in Georgia, they'll be more than happy to go to Asureti. We will also keep an eye on how things are unfolding. And by the end of the project, I believe we'll be able to provide some concrete results on involving stakeholders, on participation of tourist entities, also on the results of waste collection and sending that for recycling. And I believe this experience will be worth of being replicated in other countries. So dear colleagues, thank you. So dear colleagues, I also want to take a look at the chat. We have some questions from Elvira. So how exactly do you have cooperation between local businesses and municipalities? What concrete benefits and requirements exist for both parties? And also she said, in Georgia, it's a wonderful country. It's a beautiful place. Yes, we agree with the last one. So how do you ensure cooperation between local businesses and municipalities? This is a great question. So there are some bureaucratic issues. Sometimes some municipalities support the project as much as they can. However, municipalities do not have the right to send the recycled materials directly to recycling companies. They can do it through auctions only. And within this project, once again, municipality made a suggestion. So the recycling materials or the material that is subjected to recycling, this is not part of their responsibility. They collect their waste and this is it. But these these recyclables will be sent either individually or like to individual entrepreneurs, or this is how we discuss it with them, or maybe one of the infrastructure companies can do it. So Gypsy Village, for them, this is pretty much an interesting thing. This is something they may be interested in, because they also try to support the environmental agenda. Now, for municipalities, the benefits are clear cut. They want to develop the tourist potential of this region. If there are many foreign European tourists go to this country, so they want to demonstrate that they have a separate waste collection system, this will be an additional inflow of tourists for development. So this is quite obvious, right? Their interest is quite obvious. For businesses, this is also very good, because it's also good for their reputation. They can demonstrate that they're responsible, they care for the environment. So maybe this is not expressed in the terms of money directly, but in the long-term perspective. In the long-term perspective, if businesses want to be successful within Agenda 2030, there is no way they can avoid being a part of such projects on introducing separate waste collection or some other activities. Once again, this is good for SDGs. Thank you, Tatiana. So in fact, this is a very good question. When we organize the system, it's interesting to see how various parties of this process interact, how they cooperate. We all live in different countries. Everything also depends on authorities and regulations and local self-governance bodies and municipalities, and also on the preparedness of the private sector to be involved and to organize the system. Of course, when certain agreements are achieved within the communities, it's a win-win situation for everyone. But in various countries, municipalities or local companies that take out the garbage, the waste, so they guarantee the transportation of waste. In some other countries, this is the responsibility of the private sector. In our specific case, in UNEP, we're also trying to organize a system in a way to make it more acceptable for all parties in terms of regulation and also in terms of responsibility. At the same time, it should be aimed at some benefits for communities that may also receive a certain income, and they can also build their awareness, raise their awareness in terms of responsible consumption. And in fact, this would be a serious contribution to this recycling and something that we spoke about in the first part of our webinar. So if you have any questions, you can ask those, but also I want to give the floor to Medina, and maybe, so there will be some key messages, and then we'll be wrapping up very soon. So thank you, Asal. If we're about to wrap up, to sum up, I believe we have heard a lot today. A lot of information has been presented, and we need to digest it. So I believe questions will emerge, let's put it this way. So I suggest you talk to our partner, ESG Central Asia.
This is why I'm calling you to stay in contact with Natalia, with Asel, our project implementing partners. This is an excellent opportunity for you after this webinar to provide your ideas on the next phase of this project next year, which is why we're cordially inviting you to join this collective effort, to provide your comments, to stay in touch, and more importantly, as our international experts correctly mentioned, we are exactly where it is high time we stopped hoping for somebody else or for something else. Now comes the time for action. We have to stay active. We have to stay proactive and contribute on our own to the development of sustainable tourism and environmental certification in the region of Central Asia and Caucasus. I would like on this note to thank all the participants. I too would like to thank all our esteemed speakers and participants who joined us today, who provided their recommendations and comments. Indeed, remember that this is a global agenda that we need to learn from, implement, and utilize all the resources that are made available for us by our experts and partners. All the links, all the resource materials, presentations, publications, references to digital repositories would be made available for you. They will all be circulated. And we don't have contacts of every single one of you. However, we provided our details to you. We just dropped it again into the Zoom chat. For ESG Central Asia, please contact us at this email. You can request information, and remember that we stand ready to continue cooperating with you. I would like to thank every single participant for spending at least half a day of their valuable time to discuss such a relevant topic that is apparently important not only for just Kyrgyzstan, but for the entirety of Central Asia and Caucasus. I'm delighted to see that 80% of all the participants stayed with us till the very end. All the Zoom recordings will be in both languages, English and Russian, will be made available for you next week so that you could send a link to your counterparts, colleagues, to your fellow tourism sector operators or members of the academia. And on this positive note, I would like to thank you for your kind participation and officially close this event. Thank you. Thank you all and goodbye. Thank you all and goodbye.